This is chapter 5 of the Ridiculously Effective Parenting Training. And I got to tell you, I'm pretty proud of you that you've gotten this far. Actually, pretty proud of you that you started at all, since most parents are very reluctant to look at the possibility that they might be the cause of the problems with their children. Gee, no, it's got to be the kid's fault. So what are we going to talk about in this chapter? The first and most important thing is never, ever, ever express anger at a child. Then we're going to talk about why we naturally do it anyway, what our brilliant justifications are, why it's unbelievably harmful, how we can stop it, and how we can eliminate it entirely in our family, not just do it less. We've addressed some of this elsewhere, but it's so critical that I've learned that it has to be talked about more than once, again and again, in fact. People have probably the greatest trouble accepting this one principle over all the others, and that is that anger is always wrong. And it's wrong, not like evil, wrong like not loving. It doesn't work. The effects are just awful, that kind of wrong. Can you remember when your son or daughter was born or adopted or came into your life? It was pretty fantastic, wasn't it? You waited, you hoped, you prayed, and then suddenly there was this gorgeous little baby in your arms. Perfect in your mind at the time. A tiny new beginning, unlike anything imaginable. Perfect. And you were, well, overjoyed. Of course. What a privilege. What a treasure. Now, you may not remember this part, but I've heard people say it in the delivery room, later at home, and in public with people around. As you looked at that tiny creature with all that joy and hope, like, wow, you also made, sometimes silently, but often out loud, some promises. You promised yourself that this child would have all the advantages you ever had or didn't have. A decent home, sufficient food, a roof that didn't leak, good education, and more. But most of all, that this child would be happy. You promised yourself and your child that he or she would be happy. You may not have used those exact words. You may have used many more, but you did. Nobody has a child and then goes, I'm going to make your life miserable. They just don't do that. You promised to hold her, kiss her, tickle her, speak sweet words to her. In other words, to love her. And you meant it at the time. I mean, if somebody questioned you, you would have looked at them like they were insane. Well, of course I mean it, like with every fiber of my being. With every look that up, ERG, of energy that you had. But how many times have we made well-meaning promises that we didn't keep? Oh, many, many times. All of us. I have. Mostly we don't keep them because we don't know how, or we're somehow emotionally or mentally or spiritually simply unprepared, unable. We don't have we can see a better choice, but we're not equipped to make it. We know that the best play in the final seconds of the Super Bowl is to throw a pass from the 10-yard line, your own, to the end zone. Yeah, well, that's not going to happen because you don't have the equipment. You don't have the strength. We mean to love our partners, for example, with all our hearts. We often participate in a ceremony where we make that promise out loud. But if we were not loved unconditionally ourselves, we don't have the ability to love them. So we make a promise that from the very beginning, we can't keep. That ends up being pretty frustrating because we remember the promise from our partner, and then what we see is that they didn't keep it. We don't remember that we made one and we're not keeping it either. And the same is true with our promises toward our children. Oh, how we mean to love them. Oh, how we meant to love them. We have all tried to love our children with everything we had at the time. That's all you can do. But we didn't know what it looked like. So we didn't have it to give. All our lives, people have imposed conditions on what they called loving us. And when we've failed to meet those conditions, when we've not been sufficiently brilliant and responsible and kind and sweet and cheery and quiet and whatever, when we fail to meet those conditions, they've been disappointed or even angry. And we've done that with our children too, both because, one, we didn't have the unconditional love to give, and two, nobody taught us how to love unconditionally. So we're doomed emotionally, cognitively. We made a promise we couldn't keep. When our children have failed to obey us or be grateful or cooperative or whatever, which is our idea of their loving us, we say, well, I don't expect my children to love me. Yeah, you really do. You just call it something else. You expect them to be obedient, grateful, respectful, cooperative, yeah, whatever. When they don't love us, we have reacted badly. Of course, remember, we as parents are starving for love, real or imitation. We're starving ourselves. So our reaction has not been loving when our children have behaved badly. Makes perfect sense. Notice, I'm not condemning anybody. You shouldn't have done that, or you didn't do that, or no, this is just how it happens. We're starving to death. Our children don't give us what we want, and we get annoyed. Yeah. When you first look at a baby, you might think, what could such a little ball of perfection ever do that would make me love her less? Doesn't make sense. How could I possibly be disappointed or frustrated or irritated at this lovely little child? Well, it's a well-meaning question, but after we promise to love our children and make them happy, we encounter the ordinary events of life. Remember, we never got the life course. So we run into life. We haven't taken the life course. Yeah, we're kind of doomed. That darling little baby, early on, like within the first week, keeps you up for 2 nights in a row, and you can't even think straight, and you have to go to work, and you might have another child, and so you can't work, you can't sleep, you start rocking her. And people rarely notice this, but the more they have to rock a child, the louder the child gets. You start rocking her more vigorously, as though you were tightening a bolt. If rocking her a little doesn't work, then rocking her more with more energy will soothe her, which it doesn't. You'll rock her harder with a kind of impatient insistence that she go to sleep. I've done it. I've seen every parent that I know rocking a child do it. If the child doesn't immediately go to sleep, they get impatient. And the child feels it. It affects her view of the world and herself. And you think, I'm kidding. I'm not. Their neurologic system is so sensitive and so receptive early on that they feel everything. They can't put words to it. Their cognitive ability is way behind that. But their ability to feel, oh my, are they sensitive little creatures. And it changes their view of everything. The world, them, it wounds her when we get impatient and irritated. Then she gets older, She crawls into the cupboards and make messes that you never thought were, possible. Mixing, say, baking soda and molasses together turns out to be, for a kid, really fun and not as fun to clean up. Dish soap's all over the place. Water's running from a full sink, which to a child, this is Niagara Falls. Like, wow, cool. Not nearly as cool to mom or dad who have to clean it up. With every passing year, they become capable of inconveniencing you to new heights. As children explore the world, they unavoidably cause inconvenience for us. How could it be another way? A kid sees something and it looks like there's a possibility of opening it. Well, their little brain goes, got to try. So they open it up and then they either end up botching the job and dropping it on the ground and breaking the jar, or they do succeed in opening it up and now there's molasses all over the floor. Unavoidably, they inconvenience us. And there are days when you just wear out. No blaming. There's no blaming in any of this. You got nothing more to give. And now we got molasses all over the floor, and that's it. You already had nothing. Now we got negative nothing, and it's too much. And on those days, you get impatient and irritated. You get angry. I'm just explaining it. It's completely understandable. Studies have shown that when small children just hear in the distance conflicts between adults, when they just feel tension, there's no anger being directed at them, there's no yelling or hitting, nothing that involves the child freezes, terrifies them. And we think, oh, big deal, it passes. Remember that little sensitive, accepting, formative nervous system I was talking about? Here, this nervous system is learning what the world is like, and they hear conflict or feel tension and just freeze. They're already learning to be hypervigilant. At age 4 months, they're already acquiring, or less, PTSD. Our not loving each other as adults in the form of anger, impatience, criticism, whatever, paralyzes our children. Now imagine how the child reacts to anger directed at them. This is a nightmare. I can hardly say these words. Someday watch when a parent is nagging or critical toward their children in the checkout line at Walmart, or a relative, or you or your spouse, and watch the child's face. Nobody does that. They hear the loud parent, they hear the nagging, they hear the child screaming. Nobody looks at the child's face while they're being yelled at. It's anguish. Anguish. It's past pain. And that forms their world. That changes their brain. As I said in chapter 1, when I'm angry at you as an adult, not a child, how do you feel? Immediately, are you happy? Yeah, well, no, hardly. The moment I communicate my disappointment or irritation, you know that my concern is for myself. With anger and all its variations, irritation, annoyance, disappointment, impatience, blah, blah, everything from screaming to a simple sigh or a turning away or rolling the eyes. With anger, I'm saying this. Look at what you did to me. Look at what you didn't do for me. And how could you possibly, and parenthetically, stupidly, how could you forget that the center of the universe and of your life is, well, no surprise, me. That's what we're saying every time we're angry. It's all about me. Anger communicates me, me, me. And in that moment, is there any way in the world, and that's you as an adult, that you could feel my unconditional concern for your happiness? In other words, my love for you. Ridiculous. Not just no. I'm going to say it again. Anger is always selfish. Oh, we don't like that. We don't like hearing it, but it's true. Anger is always selfish. It's always me, me, me. And the effect on you, if I'm angry at you, is devastating. Reflect on your own life about the many times you've seen and felt the effect of anger on you and others when another person gets angry. It's scary. It's threatening. It reminds us of all the times that people were angry at us when we were children. It triggers our PTSD. And then because we're human, we respond to that anger with lying, attacking in return, usually with anger, acting like victims, running, hiding, all the getting and protecting behaviors. And then, gosh, we've got a mess. And that is the effect on you as an adult. So imagine the effect on a child who's just learning what the world is like, who's sucking in everything as a definition of the world. Every interaction defines the world for them. A child who's learning the definitions of everything in the universe and who's learning who he or she is. Children are much like, not exactly like, but still a lot like, a blank canvas. And throwing anger at them, that's really a pretty good image, but awful. Throwing anger at them is like throwing a bucket of black paint over a canvas. Whatever else is on the canvas is now gone, and the canvas is black, and whatever else you put on the canvas is going to mostly disappear. It has that big an effect. Anger equals I don't love you. And that's what our children have heard from us on uncounted occasions. Most often when we don't realize we're doing it. So here we are killing our children. We don't know we're doing it. So we can't stop it. So we keep doing it. That's the cycle of death. We do not have to say these ugly words for the I don't love you message to get across clearly and with great power. These kids really are like a canvas, and what is painted there first tends to stay there. It sticks better. If a canvas is first covered in black, let's make it worse, black tar, it greatly alters how our kids see whatever else is put there. In fact, perhaps if you put paint on black tar, it may just slide right off. I don't know. It changes what they try to put there. Changes everything. At a very young age, children feel what we are feeling, and it defines their universe. At a very young age, children feel what we are feeling, and it defines their universe. If you have to read that or hear that 20 times, fine, because it's that important. When a baby goose, earlier I mentioned that we'd probably get to this again, and here we are. When a baby goose, a gosling, hatches, it imprints on whatever living creature is there within a short period of time that is larger than itself. Ducklings do that too. And they will follow that creature around exactly as they would have done their real mother if she had been there at the time of hatching. They'll follow that creature around everywhere. Look it up. Geese or ducks imprinting. They imprint on humans, dogs, pigs, whatever. The gosling doesn't just follow around its new mistaken parent, whatever the species. The gosling believes that it is the same species as the substitute parent. This happens very quickly and often is irreversible. So if a gosling first sees a human, not only does the human become the parent of the goose, but the goose becomes, in its little mind, a human. So they want to do everything the human does. Walking, drive the car, typing, eating the same food, brushing their teeth. Many of them then will never follow their own kind, ever, nor mate with them. They become human. They become whatever they imprint on. And boy, I can't say this too strongly. Children are very much like that. Our children become whatever we tell them they are. Now, sometimes that means that they become like us. But sometimes we're angry and reacting against something that is not like us, and so they become that. But they become whatever we tell them they are. You're just so stupid. Well, then they believe they're stupid. You're just so worthless, which we can convey with a rolling of the eye. And so they believe that they're worth nothing. They become whatever we tell them they are with our behavior, our tone, our unspoken feelings, our words. They believe that they and the world are whatever we communicate. Unbelievable. Tragic often. Tragic usually. Examples. When you're angry at a child, he hears only that he is not worth loving. Well, what else could they hear? Because a truly lovable being wouldn't be the object of venomous anger, so they must not be worth loving because they're not being loved when we're angry. That continues, that conclusion, through to adulthood, which destroys personal happiness and enormously affects their schooling, their career, their relationships. I work with adults who spent the rest of their lives believing what they were told when they were infants. And wow, it's changing that difficult. When you're critical with a child, he hears only that he's flawed, actually defective. He's broken. We often use a tone like a knife, and it feels like a knife to the kid. And that continues through to adulthood, affecting everything like we just talked about. They become small. They feel small when they're criticized. And they hear criticism everywhere. Much of it real. Some of it they just fabricate to fit in their familiar world. Parental anger just might be the most damaging single act flowing through the history of the world. Did you hear that? Parental anger might be the most damaging single act, event, pattern, thing flowing through the history of the world, determining the history of the world, more than war, famine, disease, anything. Parental anger. Who knew? And who does it? You. Me. Pretty much every parent. When you're disappointed with a child, another example, he hears that he is a disappointment and that he's not what he should be or what you want him to be. What a feeling. We do it when we say things like, I'm so disappointed. Did you get the, I didn't even think about it before I did it. Before I said, I'm so disappointed, I went, I'm so disappointed. And what's the rest of that sentence? Doesn't really matter. In you. I'm disappointed in you. Just a tone will do that. And that continues through adulthood and affects everything that the child does, who's now an adult. When you're frustrated with the child, another example, he hears that he's responsible for how you feel. He hears, you are frustrating. You made me frustrated. You are responsible for how I feel. It's the only conclusion the child could make because they did something. You say, oh, you're so frustrating. So clearly, look at the juxtaposition in time. They did something. You're so frustrated. They caused it. And boy, we do not disabuse them of that conclusion. In other words, we let them believe it. That continues through to adulthood. Then the child either withdraws from life to avoid the disapproval, or, just as bad, tries to please everyone and lives in a prison of people-pleasing. Either way, the kid's pretty dead. Here's the tragedy. 1, with our anger, we destroy our children. I'm not being hyperbolic here. I'm not exaggerating. We destroy them. And 2, we don't know we're doing it or how badly we're hurting them. So we keep doing it and we make it worse and worse. Could there be a worse combination? We're destroying them. We don't know it. So we keep doing it. We're also trapped by another ignorance. Our anger is a reaction to our own lifetime of pain, but we don't know that either. I mean, ignorance just abounds, so we can't stop it. We don't know another choice but to react to our pain and hurt people, notably our kids, instead of choosing to love them. We react instead of choosing, so everybody's doomed. Us, them, then us again, and then, everybody around us. And like I said, it's the dominant pattern and the single worst factor influencing the history of the planet. Oh, way worse than global warming. How do you think we got to that? A mother called to talk to me about her daughter. She told me some utterly transfixing things about her 5-year-old who had been behaving badly lately. She said, "Mommy, when you get mad," this kid's 5, "when you get mad, I get afraid. And then I don't know where I am." Whoa. I can't even think. When I get whiny, what I need is for you to just hold me and love me. Now, this 5-year-old keeps going. This kid's thought this through. If it doesn't work the first time, she's saying to her mommy, because she knows how afraid she gets, she says, just keep doing it. Just keep holding me and loving me. And then the scared, meaning the fear, goes right out of me and sticks to the wall. This kid needs to write a book. Here's a 5-year-old telling her mother exactly what I've been telling you for, this whole training so far. What insight. Here's another way to see our anger, which also happens to be a way to stop it. The purpose of learning is so we can make better choices. When other people have been angry at you, have you ever liked it? No. Do you think more clearly when people are angry at you? No. So does anger work for you? Really work? Does it make your life happier other than the short-term gain of power? No. Does it work with your child? Does it lead to deeper connection? Happy life lessons? The child feeling more loved? No again. Does it help you fulfill your primary responsibilities as a parent to love and teach? More no. So if anger fails on every single imaginable level of life, how could you possibly ever claim, as many people do, that there are times when they say to me with a straight face, it's kind of pontifical, that anger is right? No, it's not. It's this simple. Every time I'm angry, I'm wrong. Every time I'm angry, especially at a child, I'm wrong. Yeah, I've said this before in previous chapters, but this concept is so different from what we were taught. It is so different from what the world believes almost universally, that it bears repetition of the principle and the use of as many explanations and metaphors and examples as possible. Since it's like, the dominant, terrible force on the planet, maybe we should start talking about it. Maybe once isn't enough. It's just wrong. It doesn't work. I'm not saying it's evil. I'm not saying you're bad. I'm not, but that's what people hear. I say anger is always wrong when you're using it as a parent. People hear just what they heard as children. Oh, I'm bad. But see, I don't have the same tone of voice that you heard it in when you were a kid, that you were doing something wrong. I'm just saying it's wrong, like it doesn't work. I'm not even telling you shouldn't. You haven't heard me say that once. You shouldn't get angry. Nope, I haven't said that. just telling you what the effects are. If I put a 3/8 inch nut on a 1/4 inch bolt, it just is wrong because it doesn't work. It just doesn't thread right. It's not the end of the world. It doesn't make me a bad person. I might just need to use a different bolt or different nut, depends on the situation. But I can't until I see that the 3/8 won't work with the 1/4 inch. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep trying to do it over and over and over, trapped in repetition, and it'll never work. In fact, you can cause damage. Just knowing that something is wrong, that helps us to stop it. That's why I keep saying it. When we know that anger is wrong, well, then the next time we go to get angry, maybe that phrase will sneak into our head. Wait a minute. Hang on just a sec. Anger never makes things better. It's always unloving. It's going to scar my child for life. Maybe I could choose to love and teach my child instead. Hallelujah. Yeah, maybe. Maybe a little knowledge could give us a choice to make. And if I feel loved too, because I've told the truth about myself to other people, I've told the truth, I've been seen, accepted, and loved, so I feel loved, and I have another choice. Maybe I could love and teach my child instead of destroying my child. You decide which sounds better. Love and teach, help my child be happy, destroy my child. That's the choice that we're making every time we interact with them. No kidding. Just being aware helps us to get to that. If you turn your car down a street, for example, that obviously doesn't get you where you want to go, that's called the wrong street. Doesn't make you bad. It's not evil, just wrong. Would you then go down that street over and over? No, because just knowing it doesn't get you there or can't. It's not like you can, at the end of it, take another, no, it's a dead end. Knowing that it's wrong would motivate you all by itself not to do it again. Same with anger. It's wrong. It's really actually kind of on the dumb side. So well, then maybe we'll consider not doing it, especially if we know some alternatives that do work. And we've been talking about those. The 5-year-old kid told her mother some choices. You could hold me, she said, and love me. That's 2. And if that doesn't work the first time, then you could do it again. That's 3. And then the scared just goes right out of me, and I don't remember a phrase now. It sticks to the wall. Wow. And there's much more to come. We're not just talking about this stuff. We're talking about how to change your entire life, including your child's life. I can't count how many adults I've asked how their parents treated them as kids. I ask that question a lot of times. The most common answer is, okay, it's kind of normal. We had kind of a normal house, which is disastrous considering there's almost no unconditional love in the world. Normal would be like reason to run screaming from the room with your hair on fire. Now, back to these people who said, okay, some will even say, well, it's kind of your average loving home, nightmare. After they then experienced unconditional love, maybe from me, maybe from some other people who have unconditional love, only then did they realize that their entire childhood had not been like they thought. There was no comparison. So when I asked them how their childhood was, normal, because it's the only thing they ever saw. That's it. Their world is this big. They say, well, it's okay. Looking through a keyhole. Then they experience unconditional love and they say things like this, and I'm quoting them. Somebody was criticizing me all the time, and I hated it. Or there was a feeling of tension in the house where you just felt awful. that never went away. Or I spent my whole childhood just waiting for the next attack. We talked about that earlier. So either I tried to be perfect or I just hid and stayed away from everybody. Those are real quotes from real people who said that their childhoods were normal to start with. Anger became normal. And because the parents occasionally said they loved their children, sometimes, then anger in the child's mind becomes part of loving. So part of loving people is getting angry at them. Little wonder that parents later defend getting angry at their kids because they were taught that. It is unbelievably confusing and damaging. So if it's so harmful, why do we get angry at our children? Ever. Because all day we are reacting to a lifetime of pain that we're carrying around. We have PTSD. While the present event with our children, whatever they're doing, they're acting out, the subsequent inconvenience, their disrespect, their lack of responsibility, whatever, actually plays only a small part. But that small part, if we're in the middle of PTSD and we're in pain all the time, that little part that the child does just pushes us over the edge if we're already in pain. Their behavior constitutes a trigger, talked about in chapter 1 and many times since, a trigger of our PTSD. We're already wounded, and it doesn't take much to increase our pain to the point where we react in unfortunate ways. And once they've triggered us, we don't just react to what they did, drop something, broke it, failed to take out the garbage. We react to that plus everything else that's ever hurt us, most of which we don't even remember, which makes our reactions look, well, insane. Anger is a form of temporary insanity. Not exaggerating, not trying to make a point. It is, because the things we do afterward are nuts. They're insane. We get angry at our children because we have expectations of them. Anger is always preceded by expectations. Proof. We don't get angry at the mailman if he doesn't clean his room because we have no expectations about it. But we do with our children because we do have expectations. So what do we expect from our children? We expect obedience. Every parent does. They tell a child to move. They expect the child to move. And it gives the parent a sense of power and safety when the child does move. Now, am I saying that children should be disobedient? No, we're going to get to that. But we get something out of their obedience. We don't get a sense of unconditional love, but remember, we don't even know what that is. So we do get imitation love, power and safety. And we like it. Actually, we demand it. We expect gratitude. Oh boy, do we expect gratitude, which we take as a form of praise. We expect respect, which we take as praise, power, safety. We expect cooperation, which is power and safety. And we expect affection from them, which we take as a form of praise. Now, these are qualities that children need to have in their lives if they want to be happy. Children who are obedient, grateful, respectful, cooperative, and affectionate do better in life. So they do need these qualities. The problem is with our demanding them from them and why we demand them. Rarely do we insist on these qualities in our children, almost never actually, for their benefit. When we don't have enough real love in our own lives, we demand obedience, for example, to feed our need for praise, power, and safety. We need gratitude to confirm our own worth. We demand respect to confirm our position of power over our children. It sounds so ugly. It is. And it's completely understandable. Notice I still haven't said the word shouldn't once, except to refer to the fact that I haven't said it. Now, how could we teach obedience, gratitude, respect, cooperation, and affection in the new way, the loving way? Possibly love and teach, since that's been the answer I've been giving to every situation. Yeah. And at the end of the chapter, I'll show you how we can do that. Teach all of these really important principles for their benefit. And we'll continue to do that for the rest of the training. We've been doing that actually already up to now. You might have to go back, and when you go back and you see the training again, you're going to think, he didn't say that the first time. Yep, really did. It's just a recording. We missed stuff the first time because it's so new. We have a powerful need for our children's love. Powerful. We don't feel unconditionally loved. We don't see anybody around us who's going to do it. And we bring this little darling little baby who makes cute little sounds and basses, and we go, maybe here's a source. On many occasions, I have asked adults, does anyone love you unconditionally? And a common answer, possibly the most common answer, I have to think about that, is this: yes, my children do. Oh. And in the room, if there's anybody else in the room, oh, the unconditional love of a child, so sweet. My daughter loves me. And everybody's just touched by that. Well, that's wrong. I mean, it's dead wrong. Those kids whose parents believe that they unconditionally love their parents are in real trouble. And so are the parents, with rare and exceptional moments. Mostly when children are adults. Our believing that our children love us is almost always inaccurate, inappropriate, and dangerous. No kidding. Our children are not responsible for loving us. And with the rare exceptions I mentioned, like with adult children, maybe, they're incapable of loving us. Most of us place considerable responsibility on our children to make us feel good. We prove that every time we're disappointed in them or angry at them. We expected them to make us feel good. They didn't. We're disappointed or angry. Because on these occasions, we're declaring that they're responsible for our happiness or unhappiness. And we're mostly unaware of how often we do that. Really often. If I'm with a parent who wants to learn how often they express their disappointment or their expectations of their kid, and they want me to point them out, after just a few times they go, I got it. I'm embarrassed beyond belief. They don't want to hear anymore. They can't take it. It's just too awful looking. Our happiness is not determined by their behavior. Our happiness is a result of how much unconditional love we have received over a lifetime of experiences with parents, teachers, friends, spouses, and by how loving we are toward others. Most of us, though, were not unconditionally loved. And without real love, we have become unhappy as adults and parents, and it has nothing to do with our kids. But now, it is not our children's responsibility to give us the real love we need, no matter how much unconditional love we haven't gotten up to this point. It's still not their responsibility. Children need to be loved by us. They need to be filled up with the unconditional love required for their happiness. Now, this is an important one. Not like anything else was like fluff, but pay attention to this one. Children become whole. They become whole human beings when love is initially, meaning when they're children, a one-way flow from us to them. That cannot happen while we're expecting or demanding something like love, gratitude, and so on from them in return, which would make it conditional love. It would make a trading of conditional love. They can't become whole human beings like that. It has to be a one-way flow. So let's dissect this a little bit. For one thing, our children cannot love us unconditionally. Can't. Once we realize can't, we expect less. If I know for sure that the mailman is forbidden, cannot give me a greeting kiss if I happen to be at the mailbox at the same time as he is, then I'm probably not going to expect one. Well, I probably wouldn't expect one anyway. But they can't do it. Why? First, we want to believe that our children love us unconditionally. But if they haven't received enough real love from us, as few of them have, how can they give it to anyone else, including us? In most cases, when we expect love from our children, we're asking them to give us what they've never received themselves sufficiently. That's an impossible task. And the burden on them is crushing. Second reason children can't love us. Love can be unconditional only when it's freely given. There can't be any kind of compulsion or obligation, nothing. Freely given. The giver of unconditional love cannot be empty or afraid, or it wouldn't be freely given. It would be a form of getting or protecting. When people are empty or afraid, they can only manipulate other people to get what they want or protect themselves from being hurt. Almost without exception, our children are both empty and afraid because they badly need us to love them, and they're scared to death of losing our love. These are natural conditions for a child, but they make it impossible, not difficult, impossible for children to give us real love. Simply put, they need something from us, love. Far too much to be able to love us without conditions. They need something, that's the condition. So why do we believe that our children love us? In fact, most of us believe that. We tend to, what we call, love our children more when they're good, when they do what we want. That's understandable, almost in the same way that we love chocolate more when it's, the particular kind that we like. They can feel that our approval is not unconditional, but it feels better than nothing. So they do their best, in the beginning at least, we talked about this a little, to earn more of our approval by giving us what they can see we want. Gratitude, respect, obedience, affection, and so on. We feel good when we get those things, and understandably, we then believe that our children are loving us. Because we feel good when they give us what we want, we call that love, because we were taught that was love when we were kids. If we make somebody feel good, then we're loving them. Well, then the most loving people on the planet would be, I guess, cocaine dealers. But they need our approval and love far too much to give us anything without expecting something in return. They give us what we want so that we will give them the love they desperately need. So we're doing our best so they'll love us, and they're doing their best so we'll love them. Although it's unconscious, our children trade, I just defined trade. They trade imitation love with us. And we just only too gladly participate in the exchange. All of us doing our best to survive in the absence of real love. This is heartbreaking. If there weren't hope for learning, and like we're doing right now, it would be heartbreaking. Is it ever possible for a child to unconditionally love his parents? Yeah, but only after that child has been consistently and unconditionally loved himself for a long time. And that rarely happens until well into adulthood. I've experienced a number of occasions now where my children have communicated with words or behavior or looks or whatever, that they genuinely care about my happiness. That's been freakishly cool, but not for the reason you'd think. It's not freakishly cool because I've enjoyed feeling their unconditional love. No. It's been freakishly cool because I've enjoyed seeing that they have matured to the point where they can be unconditionally loving. Entirely different thing. I'm thrilled for them, not myself. Secondarily, being unconditionally loved by anybody feels good, but it's not an extra special thing when my children love me. No, it's extra special that I know they can do it, that they've gotten there, that they've learned this, because then I know that they're happy. People who can unconditionally love are happy. I know that they can unconditionally love their spouse. I know they can unconditionally love their children. That's why I'm happy when I see it. Whether a child is capable of unconditionally loving his parents or not, no loving parent would expect such love from a child, ever. When a child can love his or her parents, it's just a delightful bonus for those parents, not something they have a right to expect, like I just explained with my children. It's just a very cool bonus. It's like going, cool. Allow me to illustrate with a real life story. I know a single young mother who was beginning to learn the principles of real love because she wanted to be happier and she wanted to be a better mother to her 3-year-old son, Brian. But she hit an obstacle that baffled her. So she wrote to me. She said, I'm much happier since I've learned about real love and studied it, understood it, found people to love me so that I could share what I have with others, including Brian. She just summarized most of the training up to this point. But just when I think I'm doing pretty well, Brian will do something. And I'm in the toilet almost immediately. She's referring, of course, to an emotional toilet. She says, let me give you an example. Earlier today, he was eating dinner and suddenly he said he hated what he was eating. Now remember, he's 3. Their minds change. They have the attention span of a gnat. And suddenly he hated what he was eating. He'd been eating it, but now he hates it. And with his face, his tone, his yelling, he was conveying his hate very well. And he said he wanted something else. And I told him this is what I'd prepared and that he'd liked it in the past. She was trying to reason with an angry 3-year-old. You don't even reason with angry adults, but here she was doing her best. You've liked it before. When have you ever seen a child go, you're right, I hadn't thought of that, and then said, now I like it. So he exploded, hardly a surprise. Angry people are just not reasonable. Remember, what did I say? Anger is a form of temporary insanity. They're nuts, so you can't reason with them. The child screamed over and over that he wanted something else. The mother's still writing this. Red-faced, impossible to talk to, end quote. Now, you know enough about life and real love, because we've been talking about him, to know that his screaming and yelling wasn't about the food. It was about power and control. He'd been eating the food, and suddenly he didn't like it because he just wanted to see how much power he could get, how much he could demonstrate, how much in control. She continues, what really surprised me is how quickly I became angry back at him, picked him up, took him to his bedroom, dropped him on the bed, and slammed his door as I left. This is actually a fairly common scene in households. I realized that I behaved like a monster, but it was like I was watching myself from outside my body. I couldn't stop myself. End quote. You got part of this right. He does have to learn, like every child, that he can't have everything he wants. He has to learn early that not everything is designed to accommodate him. Not the meals, not bedtime, not the clothing, or he'll be trained to become a demanding, entitled child who will turn into a demanding, entitled adult who nobody can stand. You have to teach him this lesson, however, in a way that he knows you care about him. The instant you're angry, you're not teaching him anything, except that you're the boss, you're bigger, and there's something wrong with him. He kept crying and screaming. She continues to write. So I left him in his room while I had lunch. Before real love, I would have given him what he wanted. I would have made a new meal, the one he demanded, even though I could see it was spoiling him and indulging him. Yeah, you would have, because I've talked to you before, and that's exactly what you've done. You have been training your 3-year-old to become an entitled, angry, miserable child, and then adult. Now, that's the part about your child. Now the part about you, where you were startled at how quickly you became rageful and, well, insane. Why did you become angry so quickly? Every time your emotional response to a situation is out of proportion, listen to this real slow, everybody. Read it, it's on the slide. Because it's really important. It's going to wrap together a bunch of things. Every time your emotional response to a situation is out of proportion to the event itself, you are reacting to your own deep-seated pain, a lifetime of it, which has permeated every cell, your personality, your judgments, your feelings, everything. In other words, PTSD. If you understand that, and if you remember that, at least you'll know that your reaction is not caused by the child. And at least you'll know that you're not, permanently insane. You're just temporarily being triggered. Notice how many things we're bringing together here. PTSD and triggers and LoveandTeach and the 3 legs of the stool and event, judgment, feeling, reaction. This is all coming together in one story. This applies to something, I'm speaking to all of you who are watching. This applies to something that you react to in your child nearly every day and probably don't see it, often many times a day, with your kids and many others. This is PTSD. So here's this screaming little child. She can't hurt him. I mean, the child can't hurt her. He's tied in his little seat. The worst he could do, I suppose, is throw some food. So he can't hurt her. All he's doing is testing how much power he can have in his life. And yet she reacted back to him. He went insane. She reacted back to him with insanity. There's no way her reaction was a response to just this little 3-year-old saying, I don't want this food. She's reacting to a lifetime of pain. And that is PTSD. That's the simple, short, easy definition. The overreaction being triggered in the present to react to the pain of the past. There, that's PTSD. That's PTSD too. It's not complicated. Now, back to mom. Another way of saying this, because it really matters. Your son, Brian, had a little tantrum. If you felt healed, loved, and whole sufficiently, I mean, just filled with real love, you would have handled it far differently. How do I know? Because I've taught parents all over the world to react lovingly and calmly to exactly situations like this, while still teaching the child important life principles, but with no overreaction on the part of the parent. But you blew up. Why? Notice I'm not saying you blew up and you shouldn't have blown up. I'm not telling you you're bad. Why am I rolling my eyes? Because that's what you heard as a kid. It's like, I'm not rolling my eyes at you, rolling my eyes at the effect of a lifetime of pain. You blew up because you were also carrying a lifetime of pain around with you from your childhood. And your reaction with Brian was partly him little part, the trigger, just like a gun, actually. How hard do you have to pull on a trigger of a gun? Turns out about 4.5 pounds for most pistols, anyway. But what happens after the trigger is much more impressive than the small 4.5 pound pull of your index finger. So it was partly him, the trigger, plus you were reacting to all the pain in your life from unhealed wounds from the time you were his age and younger, stuff you don't even remember. Who did you have in your childhood, I said to her, who had sudden outbursts of rage, like your kid, and you couldn't do anything about those outbursts, and they came out of nowhere with no apparent provocation, where you felt helpless and small and confused, just like you felt with your son? And her face just erupted. It contorted with simultaneous understanding and shock. And she said, "My mother." Yep, your mother, because I knew about her and her mother. I said, "You spent your entire childhood living with your mother's outbursts, like your child's, Brian. You couldn't do anything about them. As a kid, you can't control an adult. You couldn't make them less or go away. They just ran over you like a train. They seemed to come out of nowhere. You didn't do anything to cause them. They were way out of proportion to any imagined precipitating event. Her raging at you strongly carried the message that you were to blame. You had to deal with the pain of the rage and also the confusion about what you did that caused the rage. At least she told you that you had to deal with it, because she told you in her incoherent rantings, because I've heard them, that it was your fault. As a result of all this raging and blaming, you felt helpless and small and confused. So when your son behaves in ways in the least bit like your mother, and it turns out a lot like your mother, you don't react just to what he's doing. You react to a lifetime of pain associated with your mother's behavior. PTSD, poof. I have counseled with thousands of people, and many of them have been utterly baffled at how their lives got so screwed up. Personally, career, relationships, when they couldn't recall any kind of visible, obvious, report it to Child Protective Services abuse. But the abuse is always there. Always. And I don't have to look very hard to find it. And we don't do hypnosis or anything. I just ask 2 or 3 questions and poof, there it is. Even if they can't remember the details. Sometimes it's rage that caused them to screw up their lives, or that screwed up their lives. Sometimes it's just simple indifference or neglect. One 40-year-old woman I talked to maintained that she had been loved from birth. So all of her present problems, marriage, kids, and more, couldn't possibly be due to her childhood. She wasn't listening to what I was saying. She just couldn't bear the idea that her parents hadn't loved her. So I finally just stopped talking. I let her speak. And as she spoke, I moved a little closer. I looked deeply into her eyes, and then I just rolled my eyes while I sighed deeply with that sound and body motion that conveys deep disappointment, even disgust. She burst into tears. I felt a little bad, but I knew that she was hiding her pain that came from many moments just like that. After she calmed down, she said, "I heard that sound my entire childhood, and I've heard it almost every day since as an adult." Another woman I knew also maintained that her childhood had been just lovely, and I reached over. She said, my childhood was perfect, but my entire life is screwed up and I don't get it. And again, I pulled closer to her and I reached over, and boy, I couldn't tell you where this came from. And I just brushed away the hair lightly, didn't touch her skin, just brushed away the hair that was covering part of her face. You know how you can tell how much I know about hair, bangs, or whatever they're called. You see this all the time in women. Sometimes in guys with long hair. A little piece of hair just falls down in front of the face, and it bugs me because I'm going, you can still see? I don't say anything, but I'm going, how could you not move it? But I reached over and just moved her hair. She screamed and then cried. Her mother had done exactly that motion all during her childhood. Moved her hair, adjusted her dress, controlled everything about her with a tone of irritation that her daughter was so imperfect. So what's the point that I'm making here with all these illustrations? Simply, and yet powerfully, anger destroys a child. What else could happen with the message of I don't love you to a mind that is still forming, to a heart that is still just learning to feel? And anger isn't just rage and yelling and throwing things. Anger is everything from yelling and hitting to just a sigh or an eye roll or turning away and stomping out of the room without a word. We think we're hiding our anger, but we deceive ourselves because we ain't. When we simply sigh in frustration or with disappointment with the child, we might as well just hit them. It's all the trauma of anger. So we've talked about how our children are wounded and how they respond to their pain. I promised that we would begin to talk about what we can do about the pain and the wounds. So here's the first rule of parenting, and it is absolutely inviolable. You don't get to break it ever. It might take a lifetime to love and teach. We learn how to love better and teach better every day for the rest of our lives. It might take years for them to feel our loving and teaching enough to heal. But we can do something right now that will make a huge difference in how they feel, no matter what age they are or what problems they have. Without this step, we'll never get to the place where they feel loved. And here's the rule. Never, ever, I could have 20 evers, never, ever, ever express anger at a child. Exclamation mark. Anger is so destructive that it can tear down the positive effects of 20 to 100 loving acts in a second. Picture loving a child like building a life, because, well, it is. Or let's make it more concrete, building a house, to create a metaphor. There's a lot of work involved in building a house, laying a foundation, making the walls, ceilings, plumbing, electrical work, etc. It can take months to build a house. How long does it take to destroy a house? With a wrecking ball, a couple of big backhoes, maybe, 20 minutes. With an explosive charge, maybe a second. It's similar with anger. We have to stop hurting them before we can help them heal and build. The hurting, the wounding has to stop. I repeat, we have to stop hurting them before we can help them heal and build. Earlier in this chapter, I talked about what it was like when your child was born. And I said, in the beginning, it was like a celebration, wasn't it? Nursing, bottle feeding, the rocking, the cooing, feeling this little soul just welded to your chest. And you promised to love this perfect little child, and you promised to make this child happy. So then when a child is inconvenient, you feel poked enough that you get disappointed, irritated, and angry. In other words, you react to your pain because it's overflowing from all that you had in the past, plus some little thing the child did in the present. But when you're angry, the I don't love you message becomes like a bullet, shooting your child in the head. And oddly, they don't like being shot in the head. Under that attack, they have to fight you back. They feel like they're under fire. Or they cut their own arms, or they run, they withdraw from you, or they use drugs, or they use their smartphone, or whatever. All those things we've been talking about. There's just too much pain for them to do nothing. What am I saying? That we are the cause of these behaviors. These behaviors on this slide that we've now seen many, many times. These behaviors aren't about them. These behaviors are about us and what we did. Their behaviors are just a reaction to us. When you're angry, you cannot be loving, and you can't teach them anything worthwhile, nothing good. They can't hear anything but, I don't love you. So anger toward a child is unloving, ineffective, and if you do it over and over again and it's unloving and ineffective every single time, eventually you get to call anger stupid. Understandable. It has its reasons. But wow, is it dumb? Let's go over how anger worsens children's behaviors. So we're going to leave this slide up and go over each item just really briefly because we've seen this slide a few times. We're going to see it a few more times. Anger, arguing, resistance. We'll do this one in a minute. ADHD. We've got a child who's already in emotional pain and demonstrates that in quite a variety of ways. Inattention, hyperactivity, decreased attention span, behaviors that can be attacking, inconvenient to other people. And then we come along, and while they're in that condition, we get angry at them and add to the emotional pain that they're already reacting to. Yeah, well, that ain't going to work. Depression or withdrawal from the family. So here's a child who's withdrawing from the family or is depressed, which is just more the same. They're withdrawing from the family because of the pain they feel when they're around the family. Then we criticize them. Well, all you ever do is just sit in your room and listen to your music. So we get angry at a child who's already withdrawing in pain. Well, what's going to happen? The child's going to withdraw even more from the pain that we just inflicted on them when we were angry. Suicidal thoughts. Why would a child have suicidal thoughts? There's only one reason people have suicidal thoughts. They've been through everything else in their mind, every other solution, and nothing brings them happiness. Actually, nothing even brings them peace. It's worse. Nothing even brings them a sense of relief from their pain. Well, what's left? Just leaving life altogether. Being dead seems preferable. And then often, without meaning to, we're critical of their suicidal thoughts. We're impatient. All we have to do is go, because they've talked about their suicidal thoughts 100 times before. We don't know what to do, so we get impatient. And with our impatience or irritation or anger or whatever, we communicate, I don't love you again. And now they're pretty sure that they don't want to be alive. We just made it worse. Addictions to gaming. All you ever do is play video games. Well, they're playing video games partly because they're exciting, but that's not the major reason. There are plenty of other things in real life that are just as exciting. They're playing video games to withdraw from living. It's a reaction to pain. And we just came along and criticized them in anger. So they want even less to do with us, even less to do with real people. And so they play their games even more. Same with the use of their smartphones or other electronic devices. Why do people use alcohol and drugs? Because they're fun? No, because all of those, alcohol's really just a drug. So I could just say drugs and drugs. It briefly dulls the pain. And then we get irritated or angry at them, and so they have another drink. In 12-step programs, there's an old saying, they have a saying for everything in 12-step programs. Pour me a drink. And that's where our kids are. Pour me, nobody cares about me, everybody's angry at me, everybody criticizes me, and they drink or use drugs, and we come along and give them yet another reason to drink or use drugs. Same with porn. It's a way to escape. Same with cutting. Here's a child, and I gave you a bunch of reasons. There are at least 7 or 8 different potential benefits that a child gets from cutting herself. But they're all a response to pain. We get angry, there's more pain, there's more cutting. I know a woman who's like 30 years old, and if the tension gets sufficient in her life, either from her parents or her husband, or now her children, she still reacts like a young adolescent, and she just starts cutting herself. It's the next step for her when her stress gets to a certain point. And lack of responsibility. I explained how when a child feels enough pain in their life, what do they care about being responsible? If they're in enough pain, imagine somebody's in the pain from a terminal brain tumor, and you come to them and say, I'm so angry that you didn't take out the garbage. They're in terminal pain, and they're going, I don't care. In fact, they'll withdraw even further and become less likely to be responsible. Anger makes all these behaviors worse. Now, when I began that slide, at the beginning, where I was talking about children who argue or angry or resist, I said, we'll do the others first and we'll get to this one in a few minutes. It's been a few minutes and here we are. So we're back to the first of those 7 behaviors from our children. Anger. Their anger, which is attacking. And that's what your children are doing when they, for example, fight with each other, or you, or whoever, their teacher, anybody they have contention with. They attack each other to protect themselves. Period. That's why they do it. Happy children don't ever, this is almost absolute proof that all these behaviors are a reaction to pain. A happy child doesn't reach out and just hit somebody. They just don't do it. Stab them in the arm with a knife. They just don't do it. They do it to protect themselves. And because when they're angry and otherwise attacking the other person, they briefly feel a little stronger, a little less helpless, a little power, a little imitation love. So there's some getting there mixed in with the protecting. Now, when they're in the middle of attacking each other, what do you tend to do? You charge into the room and you yell at them with self-righteousness, stop it. That is just so common and seems to make sense. It seems almost obvious. They're doing something that's hurting each other. It's disrupting the harmony of the home. It's annoying everybody else. And so, if it were a fire, you'd stop it. You'd put it out. If it were music that were too loud, you'd come in the room and stop it. So wouldn't that make sense? You'd do that with 2 kids who are fighting? No. In fact, it's kind of hysterical on at least 3 levels. 1, take Amanda's children or any 2 of yours. These 2 children are drowning. a metaphor we just discussed earlier. When people don't feel loved, it's really like they're drowning. Ask them when they get out of the situation. It's not kind of like drowning. Emotionally, they are. And in that condition, they do whatever it takes to keep their heads just barely above water. They use getting and protecting behaviors to do that, to keep their heads above water emotionally. Then, in the middle of their drowning, you come into the room and you tell them to simply stop doing the only thing that has ever helped them to keep them from going under the water. You say, stop splashing. Stop moving your arms and legs. Stop drowning. It's like saying, well, just put your hands at your side and drown quietly. That's insane on your part. On my part as a parent. If they knew a better way to keep their heads above water, they'd be doing it. They would. They're doing what they're doing because they don't know anything else. Second, it's amazingly ironic that when they're in the midst of attacking each other, you try to get them to stop attacking by doing what? Attacking them. That's fairly crazy. And in your defense, pretty common, almost universal. Here are two kids fighting in the back seat, and the parent screams, "Don't you make me pull this car over and come back there and hit both of you. If you two don't stop fighting, I'm going to come back and I'm going to fight you both." The children can't put words to it, but they surely must be thinking, there's something wrong with this scenario. And third, where did they learn attacking in the first place? From you, like they learned almost everything else. It's not your words that your children tend to follow, like stop fighting. It's your example. And they see you angry a lot, which is a form of attacking. It's pretty funny that parents often say things like, "You two stop it and be nice to each other," in an angry tone of voice, while the parent is not being nice to the children. So do what I'm telling you, but don't follow my example. That's pretty tough for kids because they listen to our behavior far more than they do to our words. Our behavior is louder. Children who feel unloved are right at the edge of coping all the time. In that condition, it takes almost nothing to push them over the edge. A brother or sister taking a toy from them, a change in the schedule for the day, being tired, sick, any disappointment or inconvenience. All of our children's behaviors that we find exasperating, anger, defiance, fighting with their siblings, withdrawal, lying, lack of responsibility, and so on, are nothing more than reactions to the emptiness and fear in their lives, nothing more than reactions to not feeling a sufficient supply of the one thing, love, that is as essential to their emotional health as air, water, and food are to their physical well-being. This anger that hurts them does not have to be anger directed at them. Experiments prove that if children perceive conflict anywhere around them, they freeze, they're terrified. If they're older, they become contentious themselves. They stop being creative and happy. Anger has that deadly an effect on them. So now you understand the cause of your children's behavior. The next big question is, what can you do about it? What can we do about it? Well, we get angry because we're protecting ourselves from our own pain. So we already decided that getting angry at them and telling them to stop it are pretty unproductive. You've proven that thoroughly with your own experience, right? Fortunately, the answer is not complicated. If your children are attacking each other only because they don't feel enough real love, the solution's pretty obvious. What they need is to feel loved by you. we've been talking about how to do that, how to love them. I've given many examples, and there will be more. We'll get better and better with time. Feeling loved and loving them takes a bit of time and awareness and faith and practice. In the meantime, what can we do? We already kind of hinted at that in the beginning. The first rule of parenting is never, ever express anger at your child. Well, how do we do that? One of the ways is we can change our perspective on anger entirely. If we see differently, we feel differently. If we feel differently, we behave differently. I'm sure you can remember this from a previous chapter. Event, judgment, feeling, reaction. A series of events, almost invariably from the time we were little kids, led to judgments that we still have. Once the judgments are formed, we're usually pretty done, and that's about age 4. So that even if an event occurs today and it reminds us in any way of the events that happened in the past that formed a judgment, that old judgment will take over. And then after the judgment, the feeling is automatic. If an event happens that reminds us of something that scared us to death, and that event is today, then the old judgment was fear. Excuse me. The old judgment was something's going to hurt me. That's a judgment. Something's going to hurt me. It's almost always about how it's going to affect us. After the judgment, something's going to hurt me, as in there's a man standing above me holding a knife, and that's going to hurt me. There's no thinking after that. Then the feeling is automatic, afraid. And after we're afraid, there's not usually any thinking in what our response is. Now, our response may be varied from place to place, time to time, person to person. Some people would tend to fight more than other people who would tend to run. But once we get to the judgment, actually, once the event has occurred and we've linked it to an old judgment, well, then the rest of it just happens like that. So you can remember, we've talked about this in the past. So if we can change our judgment, because changing events just doesn't work out very well. Eliminate all of the people who could ever possibly inconvenience or frighten us. Yeah, it's not very likely. So the events are still going to occur, but we can change our judgment. And if we can, the feelings and reactions follow. So let's change our judgment about something very, very important. First, let's talk about the wrong judgment that we learned. The lie. The lie we learned was that events lead immediately to anger. In other words, we just skipped feeling and judgment and feeling in the middle. So somebody does something and poof, we become angry. So they made us angry. That's the lie that we were taught. Now, there could be some slight confusion, and people say, well, but anger's a feeling. Well, kind of, yes. Somebody can feel angry, but it's a secondary feeling. The event happens. The judgment is that we'll get hurt. Our first feeling is fear. Fear always precedes anger. Nobody ever gets angry unless they're first afraid. So if the feeling, for example, is confidence, is the response ever angry? No. So anger is a feeling, yeah, but it's a secondary one. It follows the primary feeling of fear, or sometimes emptiness, but even then there's pain and fear involved. Nobody ever makes us angry. That's what we're going to learn. In our society, it's almost universally accepted that other people are responsible for making us angry. Universal. Nobody would question you. You walk into a room and you're furious and somebody says, "What happened?" You say, "My boss makes me so mad," or "My wife is so irritating." There's not one person in the room. Doesn't matter how many people are in the room. 100 people are there. And you say, "My boss makes me so angry." What will they say? Not one will say, "It's been my experience that other people don't really make us angry, but that we're responding to some pain from the past." You're never going to hear that. You haven't heard it up to this point in your life. Not once. What they do say is, "Really? What did he do?" They not only join in the lie, they love the lie. We all just sit back in baths and luxuriate in this lie. We love the drama. When we're mad, we're usually blaming somebody for that feeling, and the people around us do the same thing. I talked about that quite a bit in chapter 1. But all that blaming and anger never make us happy. That's a real problem with accepting a lie like that. It never works. And yet we keep doing it. Why? Because other people, being flawed human beings and having their own needs to fill, unavoidably and regularly inconvenience us. That is just called living, including our children who inconvenience us, which we believe is the same thing as causing our anger. Our reasoning might go something like this. So, all was well in my world. I was fine. Is that a fact? Yes. Well, actually, mostly. But this is our reasoning. Then that boneheaded, inconsiderate, selfish fool, could be a child, could be an adult, did blank, whatever he or she did to supposedly make you angry. 3, immediately I became angry. So, because I would not have become angry if he or she had not behaved in that way, and because my reaction immediately followed their behavior, I rest my case. It's obvious that he caused my anger. Case closed, right? In fact, it just really seems true. People make us angry. No, they don't. Because anger is so destructive, and because blaming others only makes the continuation of anger a certainty, I'm going to present here several proofs, not just one, but several, because of the importance of this, so we can get rid of this lie, this judgment that is just killing us. So I'm going to go through several proofs that other people are never the cause of our anger. These will also stand as proofs that our children never make us angry because, well, they are other people. Listen slowly here. When you've finished watching this or finished listening to it, do it again. Because as you take this in and believe it, these proofs can change your thinking. They can change your perspectives, your judgments, and you will gain the ability to change your world. And since this is the subject of this whole training, it will give you the ability to teach your children the kind of truths that you were not taught. I'm teaching you the life course you were not taught, so that you can teach the course in life to your child. These are the principles that will give your children great personal power for the rest of their lives. And isn't that what you want? I want you to notice something here. It's not an accident that I'm teaching you how our anger is not caused by others, instead of just going straight to the solutions that some of you are looking for. Like, how do I deal with my children who are difficult, who have ADHD, who are cutting or withdrawn or irresponsible or addicted to electronic devices or whatever else. Why don't you just give me the dang answer? Why are you talking about this anger thing again? I'm doing this because the answers to your questions about specific problems require groundwork. A well-built house requires a foundation. The solutions really are like creating a building, and we have to build the foundation first. I know we would love to get to the spires and the pretty windows and the drapes and the carpet, and I mean, that's the fun stuff, right? We'd love to get to the beautiful beds with the 400 count Egyptian cotton sheets. Well, you can, but if you do that without building the foundation, the cotton sheets aren't going to matter much when the building's falling over. The solutions that you're looking for are like the solutions to calculus problems. And we have to learn to add and subtract, multiply and divide, and perform algebraic functions long before we're ready for calculus. It's that simple. Until you believe that your children do not make you angry ever, you will not succeed in loving and teaching them, because you will always find some justification, some reason. You'll find an occasion where you'll go, this is the one. This is the exception. This is the time that they make me angry. And then you're doomed, because now you can't love and teach them. So we have to go through these proofs so that there's no doubt left in your mind that they never make us angry. So back to these proofs. No one ever makes us angry. Proof number 1. We always have a choice. We human beings have more ability to choose than any other creature or object, like including entire galaxies that we are aware of. In fact, we're proud of our ability to choose and have often defended that ability and right to the death. And yet, we can be very quick to claim that other people can make us angry. As soon as we claim that other people make us angry, we reduce our status to that of objects, simply reacting, as I've said before, like billiard balls being knocked around on the table. Why are we so proud of our ability to choose, but in the next breath, willing to hand it over to somebody who makes us mad? Because we claim the ability to make choices only when it suits us. We like being responsible for choosing what we eat, what we wear, where we live, whom we will marry, because we like that independence. Then we like the consequences. We like the rewards of those choices. But we don't like being held responsible for our own anger. We'd rather blame that choice on somebody else. When we're angry or we make any other mistake, there are only 2 choices immediately apparent. 1, we can take responsibility for our own emotional fragility and reactivity and immaturity and do something about it. Or 2, blame somebody else. Yeah, I'll go with number 2, because blaming is much easier, at least in the short term. In our defense, in the absence of real love, our ability to choose our responses to people and situations is severely impaired, because the best choice, feeling loved and being loving, becomes nearly impossible. But we can learn to find love, as we talked about in chapter 2. And as we feel loved and change our judgments, which we talked about in this and earlier chapters, our ability to choose rather than just mindlessly react increases exponentially. We've talked about all this before. Earlier, All day long, we get to forks in the road, potential choices, left or right, zeros or ones. We're proud of our ability to choose. All hail free will. But on the whole, not so much. We pretty much don't have free will, because rarely do we make real choices because we can't see them. We get to a fork in the road, but if we see only one choice, then practically speaking, that's not a choice. We just react in the same direction to the same old pain. And it's boring, and it makes us small. One of the most powerful things you'll ever do is to teach your child more choices, more productive choices. It makes them powerful. And teach them how to make those choices and to give them the ability to make those choices, which you do when you love them. When we can see loving choices and when we've been loved enough to make them, that is true power. In that condition, nobody can ever make us angry. That is life-changing. Now, proof number 2, for no one ever makes us angry. It's your emptiness and fear that lead to anger, not what someone else does to you. In chapter 1, I talked about how drowning people just react. They don't choose. They're not rational. What you see in a drowning person is not who they are, but how they react to drowning. It's the same with anger. The way they are responding with anger and craziness is not who they are. It's not who you are. It's just a reaction to pain. Now, another metaphor, because the more we have in our brains, one metaphor works better for another person, and you may remember one better on one occasion than another. The more we have, the better. You're starving to death. You have $2 left to your name. You put the $2 on the table, you get dressed, you're getting ready to go out to the market to buy a loaf of bread. And I come in the room and I grab your last $2. The last $2 that you hoped to exchange for a loaf of bread. And remember, you're starving to death. You're not just hungry. This isn't dessert. This is to sustain your life. But now let's change the circumstances. Again, you're getting ready to go out to the market to buy a loaf of bread with $2, but this time you have $20 million in the bank. And I come and I take $2 off the table. Do you feel the same? The same anger. Actually, and for most of us, do you feel angry at all? $2 is statistically nothing compared to $20 million. You might even say, hey, hang on, wait a second. Do you need some more so that you can go out and get a decent meal? You were angry the first time, and understandably, you blamed your anger on me because that reasoning again. Things were relatively okay. I did something. You immediately became angry. It's got to be me. But now it's really quite different. Your anger was either eliminated or greatly reduced because you had $20 million, proving that your anger in the first scene was caused not by me, but by your lack of $20 million. Proof. The logic is perfect. When we have enough real love in our lives, we feel as though we have 20 million emotional dollars with us all the time. Oh, I wish I could always remember that. When we have enough real love in our lives and when we remember it, we feel like we have 20 million emotional dollars. With the greatest of all treasures, that 20 million emotional dollars, the little inconvenient things people do become relatively unimportant. It's the same stupid inconvenient things that people do, but now we're emotionally wealthy and we just don't care. We have everything that matters. But without it, we become afraid. We're at the edge of survival. We're at our last $2, and we protect ourselves with anger. Our anger is caused by a lack of real love in our own lives, not by what our children or anybody else does in a given moment. Proof number 3. 4, nobody ever makes us angry. If anyone else does not become angry when one person does the same thing, then the thing can't be the cause of our anger. Now, back to taking the last $2. I've watched people all my life be affected by illness, loss of job, loss of loved ones, physical and emotional pain, and I have seen drastic differences in their reactions to the pretty much same events. Some of us get angry when other people are inconsiderate toward us, but others of us do not. Clearly, the problem is not the people who are inconsiderate. If that were so, everyone would become angry when he or she was treated badly, but that doesn't happen. In fact, if you get angry when I do something, and we can find even one person in the world who doesn't get angry when I do the same thing, then I did not make you angry. You made a choice, or, at the very least, reacted involuntarily, mindlessly, to past pain. Sort of, by the way, our other feelings are not the fault of other people either, nor our getting and protecting behaviors, nor our use of imitation love. It's possibly not a conscious choice on our part when we get angry, but it's still not the fault of other people. Is there an exception? Yeah. Our parents did cause all this pain and subsequent behaviors, and we in turn pass that pain on to our children. So we could say that yes, our parents caused us to get angry and that we cause our children to get angry, but our parents got their pain from their parents and them from their parents and so on. So how is it useful to talk about this exception? There's no blaming. What else can we do about our anger? Because it's a terrible poison. Just love. That's all there is. With it, we can learn to become free to love our children, undistracted by emotional death. So what does loving our children look like? The first and most important thing you need to know about loving your children is that you must absolutely eliminate the expression of disappointment and anger. Gone, none, zero. I'm not kidding. As I said in the last chapter, and the one before, every single time you're disappointed or irritated, they only hear, "I don't love you." And when they hear that, they become stone deaf and wounded and likely to perpetuate awful behaviors the rest of their lives. You certainly can't teach them a thing once they hear, "I don't love you." And that's your goal, right? So when you're irritated, you're done. Now, parents commonly say to me, "I'm doing better with my anger at my child." Oh, please don't. Don't bother saying it. And don't bother congratulating yourselves. And no, doing better doesn't make any dang difference at all. With anger, gradual improvement is not enough. Now, some of you must be going, "Oh, then I'm dead." I recognize that without love, achieving the state of no anger is pretty tough. You're wounded too, so your anger is understandable. Love eliminates anger, so how can we get to no anger before we feel loved? How can I say never ever express anger at your child if you're going to get angry when you're in pain? Turns out we can still do it. How often do you stop, as an example? How often do you stop for a red light when you're driving? Every time. every time. Well, but what if you're in a hurry? Every time. What if the traffic's bad? Every time. Well, what if there's nobody coming from either direction? Well, hopefully still every time, because you can't predict what's going to come really fast from the right and the left, and it just happens to be the law every time. If you do it most of the time, you're dead. Or you'll kill somebody, or you'll injure other people. You don't get credit for improving. When the police pull you over for running through a red light, they're never impressed when you say, I used to run every red light, but man, I'm doing 10, 15% better. Never does he pull out a box, the policeman, with a medal in it, and pin it to your chest. Well, on your way then, 15% improvement. Wow, I'm amazed. There's no credit for improving on anger at our children. How much arsenic do you put in your children's breakfast? I'm really asking. Well, none. And if you were putting arsenic in your children's breakfast cereal, you don't get any credit for improvement. You'd probably be in jail. Same with anger. Yes, love has a role, and we've been talking about love a lot, and we're going to keep talking about love. But there are some things that we can simply choose never to do. Now, you'll probably never had this experience. Well, some of you have, but I've done some rappelling and some really simple climbing, but I've been around some real climbers. And their climbing rope, the thing that you see, wrapped in a coil and they carry on their shoulders, you'll see it in documentaries on climbing Everest. Their rope is their life. Their ropes all have these beautiful little colored patterns on them, alternating purple and white or gold and blah, blah. And part of the reason is because, well, it's really cool looking. And it's because any given climber can identify his rope immediately. He goes off to go to the bathroom and he comes back and there's his rope and nobody can fool him. They all have really particular patterns. It turns out that what you see is the pretty pattern on the outside is the kern of the rope. It's the protective outside. Keeps the rope from being scraped. But the mantle, the part of the rope that is really strong, that keeps the climber from, falling to his death, is inside and has a completely different appearance and structure. So if you step on a rope, like if there's, say, dirt in a rope or sand, or you're on the edge of a rock and you step on a rope, you can break fibers on the inside, the mantle, and the outside of the rope looks perfectly normal. So climbers are really touchy about you stepping on the rope. In fact, if you even get near most climbers won't even leave their ropes on the ground. They hang them on their shoulder. But if they do, and you even approach one, they'll look right into your eyes to make sure that they're making eye contact with you. And if you keep walking, they'll say, don't even think about it. And climbers simply make the choice that they will never step on somebody else's rope. And if you haven't made that choice, they will teach you how. What I'm saying is there's some things, stepping on a rope, running through red lights, putting arsenic in your children's breakfast cereals, that no matter how you feel, whether you're having a good day or not, whether the traffic is bad, whether you're in a hurry to get to the bathroom yourself and, the climber's rope just happens to be in the way and you step on it. No, there are some things we just have to choose not to do ever. And here's one of them. I will never, ever express anger at my child. Ever. This is very much like, I will never hit my child with an axe. So let me ask you, just straight out, could you make that commitment and keep it? I would think yes. I have never hit one of my children with an axe. I would bet that even if I gave you an axe and you got really angry at your child, you would keep the commitment not to hit your child with an axe. Or if I tell you that if you say the word cauliflower, I will shoot your child dead in the head with a 9mm pistol, fall over. Do you think you could stop the use of the word cauliflower? You'd probably stop the use of any word that began with the sound k. Yes, you can keep that commitment. And you can do it with anger. I'm not kidding. You really can, because I've seen people do it. I'm not telling you, listen to this part, not to be angry, because it's just one of the protecting mechanisms you learned. It's automatic. An event happens, you form a judgment, you get afraid, and sometimes you are just going to be angry. What I'm saying is you can make a choice never to be angry at your child. You can be angry, just not at your kid. And I'll tell you what to do if you feel anger and you're around your child. But you can make the choice not to do it, ever. You can learn what to do with it instead. And we're going to talk a lot more about this, so relax. Just accept what I'm telling you, that you can do this. You can do this initially loving thing that will make it possible to build an entire home of love for your child. And the first initial thing is, I will not break the foundation. I will not drive a bulldozer through the house. Now we can start building. See? So not being angry doesn't actually build the house, but it does make it possible to start. It might appear to be impossible. Fortunately, however, you'll now have the benefit of knowing the 5 steps for responding to your anger. So, first step in responding to your own anger, because you're going to get angry. You learned that anger protects you, and once an event has triggered you, you're going to get to anger like poof. So, you feel angry. That's not your fault, really. It's just a response to a trigger. Just like I stab you in the leg with a fork and you feel pain. And your first response is to leap from into the air or whatever. But it turns out that if you know the fork is coming, I mean this, because I've worked outside lots of times, and I might be balancing on an I-beam across the creek, and something does fall and stabs me in the leg. I make the decision when I go out on the beam that no matter what happens, I'm not going to react to it. I'm not going to react to it like I normally would with pain, with withdrawal, because now I fall off the beam and fall against another beam and off the bridge and into the creek. Turns out you have a choice after the initial pain and anger. The initial anger, nope, not your fault. So what do? You stop. I know it just sounds almost too simple. The first step is to be quiet. If you can't remember be quiet, then remember shut up. You have to kind of prepare your mind for this. So anger is going to come up when I'm with my child. That's going to happen. It's like, remember me out on the I-beam. Something might happen. Somebody might distract me. Somebody might call my name. But while I'm out balanced on the beam, I make a choice that my next move is not to respond like I normally would. I can do that, it turns out. I was initially astonished to learn that I could stop a reaction. I'll have it to begin with for a second, but second number 2, you have a choice. So you get angry, but then you choose that you will not speak when you're angry, not when you're with your child, because you know that this will only cause injury. So you do event, judgment, feeling, and reaction. An event has occurred, my child has done something, and while your mouth is closed, you think, so my previous judgment was this child was intentionally being disobedient or inconvenience me or whatever. No, I'm going to change my judgment right here in the middle of my being angry or in the next few seconds. No, they're just reacting to their own pain. Or maybe they're being ignorant or stupid or whatever. But they're not being stupid to me. They're just being kids. So you stop, you pause, you change your judgment from my child is hurting me to my child is simply not listening and needs some additional help to listen. Or my child has simply caused me an inconvenience. Wow, that's a dramatically different judgment from my child is hurting me. You can choose to make that change in your judgment. And once you've made the change in judgment, well, then the feeling is quite different. My child is just being inconvenient or needs help. Okay. It's like seeing that they're drowning. The initial reaction to the first splash, well, you still get wet. And your initial reaction might be irritation. But then you stand up, and in the process of standing up, see things clearly, change your judgment, your feelings change, and your response changes completely. And that's what you're going to learn to do with your child. That's it. And it starts with, shut up. Anger never leads to happiness. You remind yourself of that in the next second after you feel angry. When you get that, your feelings change. And so will your anger. All of this happens in second number 2, after your child has done something where you then feel angry immediately. You're not responsible for second number 1. That's just a response, a reaction. But second number 2, now we get to start choosing, especially after you've taken this ridiculously effective training. Now you know what to do. Cool. All right, well, let's go to the next step. So be quiet. Be wrong. Be wrong. This is a choice I'm going to make. Be quiet. And if you don't know what to do next, just move to the second step. Really. Shut up. Okay, what was that second step? Because you will have gone over this chapter again and again in your mind. Second step, be wrong. What does that mean? You realize that when you're angry, you're always being unloving, every single time. Anger is never an expression of love. I have never one time expressed irritation of any kind, impatience, just the slightest annoyance, anything, to my partner, to Donna, and had her respond with, "That was so sweet of you to say." People know it's never loving. We've established that. So because it's not loving, because it never works on any level, it's always wrong. And you're going to stop and do that. Be quiet, number 1. Be wrong. It's always wrong because it never works. It always hurts other people and hurts you. So pretty easy to say, I'm wrong, huh? Even if you're just saying this, by the way, you're almost always saying all this yourself. You're getting irritated at your child who's in the room, and you go, shut up. Be wrong. That's right. When I'm angry, it never works, so I'm wrong. Then you have all kinds of options after that. You can talk to other adults, especially those who are taking or who have completed this training, about how you're wrong. You can consider, as you talk to these other adults, as they accept you, you're telling the truth to them. You're feeling seen by them, accepted by them, loved by them. That's a potential step. If you're really brave, you can ask your kids to tell you when you're angry and remind you that they don't feel loved when you're angry. We'll get to these other responses in later chapters. For now, let's move on to step number 3. Be quiet, be wrong, feel loved. That doesn't seem to make sense on the surface. How do I feel loved when I'm angry? Well, remember, first you shut up. You remembered you were wrong. And then you will try to remember the unconditional love you have received from other adults as you have told the truth about yourself. Feel loved. Feel loved you've gotten in the past. This, of course, requires actually having had unconditionally loving experiences. And we talked about those, including visualization, meditation, including my loving you, including feeling loved by God, including loved by whoever, whenever. We talked about that in chapter 2. Now, step number 4. Be quiet, be wrong, feel loved. If you can remember those experiences, we've all had them, especially if you've gone this far in this training. Number 4, get loved. If the first 3 steps don't do it, you will leave the conversation with your child. The first 3 you can do while the child's in the room. You can just shut up. You can go, this is stupid. Whatever word works for you for wrong. I use the word stupid. If I'm saying something to somebody and I feel the irritation coming in, I go, this is stupid. Never works. That's my version of wrong. I don't do stupid like you're a terrible person, you need to kill yourself. No, it's just stupid as in it doesn't work. I try to feel loved. If that doesn't work, then I go, excuse me for a second, I'll be back in whatever. I'll be back in 5 minutes. I'll be back in a week. Whatever it takes you to get to where you're not angry with your child ever. So you leave the conversation and instead you might call another adult. You might visit in person with another adult. Somebody who can love you and help you see your mistakes. I talked a lot in chapter 2 about how we find those people and how we'll do everything we can, how we will do everything we can in real love parents, real love parenting to give you such people. Last step. Be quiet, be wrong, feel loved, get loved, and be loving. Be loving. After following the first 4 steps, and after all we've talked about to this point, you may surprise yourself. You may find yourself just simply prepared by going through all that to interact with your child in a loving way. I've given you lots of examples of responding to your child in a loving way. Lots of them. You might then be prepared to remember one of those ways because you went through the first 4 steps. Sometimes being loving first can be effective. You feel anger come up. A parent wrote me the other day and said, my son did something and I started to feel angry. And he said, to my shock, because he had taken this training, he said, to my shock, the first thing I did wasn't think of the first 4 steps. He said, I went over to my son and just wrapped my arms around him and said, I love you. And he said, my anger was gone. It turns out we've talked about how love is an infinite flow, like an infinite river in the universe. And when we're with the flow, it feels great. When we feel unconditionally loved, it feels spectacular. But it feels equally good, even better actually, when we are loving. And if you can stop everything you're doing and simply engage in a loving act towards somebody else, you find that you just can't keep being angry because you're in the flow. And in the flow, in that eternal flow of love, there's no anger. Fear and anger and lies are not eternal principles. You can't find them in the flow. That's very cool. Now, some special circumstances to discuss. In loving and teaching, sometimes you have to be direct with your children. It's unavoidable. One day I was with one of my grandchildren, Jack, and he was a toddler, and you know how they walk, like they're kind of a combination of drunk and have a broken leg. And he was toddling into the street. I hadn't yet had my knees replaced at that point, and every step just killed me. So here's this toddler who can barely walk, and he's running much faster than I can. And he's nearing the street, and I can see that he's going to reach the street before I have a chance of reaching the street, even running as fast as I can, disregarding the pain. So I called his name really loudly. Turns out I have a pretty loud voice. You could hear me in the next town. So I called his name, which would sound like anger. Our experience pretty much is that if somebody yells at us, they are angry at us. Yes, but no, not always. Sometimes it's just information. When a quarterback on a football team shouts a series of numbers for the benefit of the people who are on the line, and then finally says hike or whatever the code of the day is for the center to give him the ball. Well, we have, 80,000 people in the stands who are screaming. The noise is utterly deafening. So he is screaming these instructions. Why? Because he's angry? No. To yell at his team because he's mad at them? No. Because they're stupid? No. Because he's mad at the other team? No. Because that's simply what it takes to get the message up and down the line so that the team's all on the same page. That's why I yelled at Jack. And I yelled at him pretty loudly. And for a moment, it was like he'd been hit with a board. He was toddling along and just locked up and quit moving. He didn't quite fall down, but it was almost enough to make him fall down. And he turned and looked at me to see if I was angry. But see, he's been raised in an unconditionally loving home, so he was pretty uncertain because anger isn't the way he's been raised. I wasn't angry at him. And when he looked at me, he could see that I wasn't angry at him, so he wasn't bothered. I just explained to him that 2 more steps and he would have been hit by the car, which by now was passing him and going down the road. And I said, if you got run over by the car, I'd be really sad. And he threw his arms around me after I yelled at him. But before you're direct, which is a special circumstance, be mighty dang sure that you feel loving. If you feel irritated or frightened, it's unlikely that you're being loving. So those are clues. Now, at this point, I realize, I really do, that we have pounded on the subject that anger is harmful. I get it in every chapter. And I explained why. Anger is so epidemic. It is so everywhere that it's normal and it's killing us. Parental anger is the most harmful force on earth today. I believe that more than global warming and all the diseases combined, because it just destroys children. And once you do that, they may be able to earn a living and look good. They may be able to do stand-up comedy and act in movies, and they're miserable. and I get to see them as adults, and they're miserable. They're afraid of everything. Their sense of worth is nothing. And so they either work hard the rest of their lives trying to prove that they're worth something, or they just give up. They're on antipsychotics, they're on antidepressants, they're on Adderall, they're on... The effects of our anger are death. Now, even though I've emphasized that, don't even think about making a resolution that you won't get angry at your children anymore. You might be well-meaning, but don't do it. It's laughable because, of course, you will. You still have some of your own wounds, and you're going to think that you are Buddha sitting under the banyan tree in a lotus position and nothing could disturb you, and some truck will come along and run over your foot and you'll get angry. So you will. The reason you get angry at them is the exact reason they get angry at each other. You don't feel enough real love in your life. And without that, you can't just suddenly decide that you're going to be more loving and never be angry again. You can't. Well, you can decide it, but that's not going to make it happen. You can't give what you ain't got. Can't give love you don't have. But at least now you're better prepared already, just in seeing the choices, just in feeling the love that I've been communicating to you, the love that you felt in the visualizations, the love that you might have experienced from a divine source as a result of our talking about it. You're better prepared. And we talked about how you can find more love for yourself. And since then, we've talked about how you can use it, how you can use your love, how you can teach your children. So you're better off. And it's going to keep getting better because you're going to look at the training again. You're going to go to the Real Love Parents website. You're going to keep going because it matters, because your children's lives are at stake and you really want to care about them, even if you don't entirely know how to now. I have asked large groups of parents to imagine, just close your eyes like a visualization, and imagine no anger in their lives, the parents, and no anger from the children, no anger from the parents to the children, no anger from a child to a child. Imagine no anger in your home. Do you know that most people close their eyes and within seconds open their eyes and go, got nothing? Meaning, they can't even picture this. Anger is so common, it's a background noise. It's there all the time. It proves that we've lived with it all our lives and come to accept it. But I believe you can imagine it. You have felt loved during the training in a variety of ways, which I just described. If you keep going, the day will come when there will be no anger in you. Now, I can still remember the first time that happened to me. I can still remember the first time somebody did something and I thought, that would really have made me angry in the past. And right now, nothing, no anger. I can still remember when I chose my response instead of having it chosen for me from my past judgments. Wow. We don't realize how much we're prisoners to the past. We're just handcuffed and thrown on the floor of a cell. The past determines what we do in the present, or it has. It doesn't have to. Earlier, we talked about what we tend to expect of our children, the forms of what we take as love, even though we wouldn't call it that. We don't intentionally say, oh, when they're obedient, they love me. But that's how we feel about it. Or at the very least, we feel this. If they're disobedient, they don't love me. At the very least, it's the same thing. just two sides of the same coin. So let's briefly talk about how we can handle these expectations and principles differently as a prelude to future chapters where we will talk about it even more and more. I'm about to get really practical with these things that we've learned. And as you see this the second time, you'll appreciate even more how we've been giving practical examples of these principles in every chapter, several times. Now we're just going to do it more and more because, well, you know more. I talked about why we get angry. And one prominent reason is expectations. So what do we expect from our children? In other words, what would predispose us to being angry at them? Be a good thing to know. Obedience. We expect our children to obey us. We brought them into the dang world, and we're the parents, and we know everything, and they're just little kids. And so when I tell you to do something, then you hop to it. You get it done. And we get a little sense of power out of that. We expect gratitude. Again, everything they have, we gave them. Birth, home, education, goes on and on. So we expect a little gratitude. In fact, we just tell them straight out that we do. We give them something, we say, now what do you say? Respect. I mean, we are essentially the givers of life to these kids. Well, they'd better respect us. Often these expectations are unconscious, but that doesn't make them less powerful. Cooperation. We're doing something, we ask them to cooperate with us. Oh, even if it's down to just cooperate with putting on their coat. We expect that. And we expect some affection, as I typified by pointing out the example of our saying to a child going to bed, come give me a kiss. So let's look at these one at a time. We'll talk about how we can teach each principle, and we'll continue teaching them in subsequent chapters. We're going to keep at this till you get it. We're going to use this training. We're going to use subsequent filmed answers to questions you send in, written answers to questions you send in. We're going to record and archive conference calls where I'm going to be answering questions. We're going to illustrate how to parent in, not kidding, thousands of ways. So first, the expectations we have of our children, at least in the list that we just went over. The first expectation is obedience. As I indicated earlier, we tend not to teach obedience, and certainly not for their benefit. Rather, we expect it. More accurately, we demand it. We tell a child to do something, and if they don't, if that little stinker isn't obedient and immediately, we don't just notice it. We're personally offended. After all we've done for them, how dare they be disobedient to us? And we tell them so. We say things like, what did I tell you to do? Did you hear my tone of voice? The rest of that sentence is, you disobedient, ungrateful, barely worth breathing blob of flesh. That's how the child fills in that blank, by the way. Not consciously, not with words, but that's how it feels. What did I tell you to do? Is not a question, even though it kind of goes up at the end and ends with a question mark. We already know what we told them, so we're not really asking. They know what we told them, even though by their behavior you wouldn't think. And we know they know. Hence, not a question. Well, what are we doing then with this question? We are intimidating them. We are coercing them to be obedient. Might even work for a while, especially when kids are young, but eventually it gets old to them. They get kind of used to it, then tired of it, and then they hate it. And then they rebel. Or worse, they do continue to be intimidated. They do continue to be obedient to our expectations. And they spend the rest of their lives pleasing people, obeying the expectations, spoken and unspoken, of everybody. And they're miserable. Which is worse, them being people pleasers or them being intimidated and rebelling and hating us? Well, they're the same. But if you're a people pleaser and you're addicted to people pleasing, and we talked about addictions, we become addicted to anything that makes our pain less. If you're loud and rebellious and angry and you rob banks, but then they put you in jail and they tell you can't do that. If you're a people pleaser, whoever says to a people pleaser, no, really, I want you to stop doing so much for me, we might, superficially protest. No, really, you don't have to, but we don't mean it. People love to be around people pleasers. They really do, because they get what they want. But with our demanding, whichever way the kid goes, we're not teaching obedience. Not real obedience. Not obedience that they need to learn. We're just teaching fear. That's all. If you want your children to be afraid all their lives, demand obedience. That is not living. So I just gave you a really practical example of how our expectations just lead to death. So, do children need to learn obedience? Because up to this point, it could sound like requiring obedience or teaching obedience is like somehow inherently bad. No, they really do need to learn obedience. How do I know? This is easy. What if they don't learn obedience? Freely given obedience that they choose, not learning fear and calling it obedience. I mean, the survivors of Auschwitz were obedient, but not freely given, certainly didn't make them happy. What happens to a kid who has a general attitude of disobedience, who reacts against their parents' demands of obedience? What happens? Well, they break the rules. Sure, in the beginning, it's almost cute. Like you tell them to stay in bed and you turn around and you know that the child is crawling out of bed before you've left the room. And so they get out of bed after bedtime and then they come in and they go, hi. And if there are other people in the room, everybody goes, oh, and that's so cute. But then it starts to get really not cute when they're disobedient. They don't do what you instruct them to do. They run off in the mall and get lost. Nobody finds that particularly funny. Then they carry it into school where they get into trouble all the time and live in detention pretty much until they're, suspended and then eventually expelled. And they're often praised for their disobedience by fellow rule breakers. It becomes a source of power and praise. These kids don't study because it's a rule. It's almost like a guideline in their life that they have to fight every rule. So they don't study and they don't do well in school, which affects the rest of their lives. And then they can't get jobs, or they can get a job, but they're grossly underpaid and grossly underemployed for their level of intelligence and, native ability. And the effects of that last for a lifetime. So I just talked to a friend not half an hour ago whose sister did exactly this. His parents and her parents, because they were both raised in the same home, not all brothers and sisters are. And the father was just a crushing man emotionally. And eventually she just rebelled against the whole thing. But rather than, attack other people, she just sort of gave up. So she gave up in school and she didn't become educated and had no skills, got no training, got no anything, and eventually despaired and then got in debt and incurred short-term debt with loan sharks. And 3 days ago, she killed herself. She's dead because whoever taught her what they thought was obedience only taught her fear. That point getting through? These little mistakes that we make, this is why I keep talking about them. She's dead. And she was dead emotionally and on antipsychotics and antidepressants and for all the decades of her life until then, which was, I think, 50-something years. Well, it isn't cute now, is it? Being disobedient. Being underemployed is pretty limiting, potentially crushing to the soul. And in the case of this woman that I just talked about, physically deadly. Nobody's laughing now. If they do get jobs, they continue their belief that they can make their own rules. And I've worked with a great many such men and women. And it turns out that employers, how unreasonable, have requirements for employment. They actually hired you to do a thing that, insane, they define. Well, how could they not? Why else should they hire somebody? The workplace would break down without these requirements, which means that employees have to be obedient to rules, guidelines, protocols, processes, standards, blah, blah, blah. If they're not, the boss can, and will, find somebody else to fill that job. And the disobedient kid, now an adult, at least by age, finds himself or herself out of a job, and every subsequent job is harder to get because of the past references and other reasons, behavioral patterns, harder to get and harder to keep. And I know people who have had more jobs than the fingers and toes of 10 people because they never learned to be obedient. By choice. They carry an attitude also of not caring what other people think. That's kind of what disobedient is, because what other people think is too similar to rules. And I'm not talking about people pleasing. I'm talking about people who just walk around with an attitude of, I don't care what you want, or I don't care what's normal. I don't care what's civil. Most people don't like that. They find relationships, the disobedient kids as adults, difficult. They find marriage impossible because spouses do have some requirements for partnerships as they're entitled to have. As parents, oddly, they're often very demanding of obedience from their children. That's that power thing. Or they don't care at all, which also cripples the child. And eventually, these disobedient kids, now adults, refuse to obey rules that extend to the laws of the land, and they might begin small, drunk driving, I only had 2 beers. I worked in emergency rooms for years, and some of the emergency rooms were in Texas, and just pure fun. Sometimes I would say, so, how much did you have to drink? It was always the same. Everybody in Texas drinks the same amount, it turns out. 2 cervezas. So 2 beers. Yeah, right. You had 2 beers in the last 5 minutes. No. How much did you drink overall? So it starts off little. Drunk driving, little cheating, little embezzling, little stealing. But then it gets worse and it gets habitual. And poof, before they realize it, but it's been in the works for decades, they're in prison. And they have no idea how they got there. So I promised you that we were going to get increasingly practical. How do we teach obedience? I just told you how not to, because the results are terrible. Or what happens if you don't teach it? Or if you teach it the wrong way, wrong as in doesn't work, how do you teach obedience in a better way? Oh, this is easy. You already know the answer. What do parents do? Love and teach. Teaching obedience would then be accompanied by, pause, yeah, love, no surprise. So we love and teach. Imagine you have a child who you've told not to do something. Get out of bed, draw with crayons on the walls, don't drink alcohol, whatever. But they do. They're curious to try stuff. Little kids, little brains are just spinning with possibilities. They just look around and go, man, I could pull on that. I could climb up on that. I wonder if that would break. They're just curious. They want to try everything. So what do you do? How do you teach obedience with that kind of curious mind? Because they're trying stuff out begins very early. And so you have to begin to teach obedience very early. Now, I started teaching my children obedience, and I'll talk about how in just a minute, really early. That we obey laws because it makes us happy. You become aware of and remember and obey the law of gravity, because if you don't, and you're at the edge of a cliff and you decide, that looks like it would be fun to just jump out into the valley. Well, it would be. It really would be fun to just jump out into the valley. And I've done a version of that, rappelling on a rope. It's fun. But if you just jump off a cliff, say a couple hundred feet in the air, it's fun all the way down until right when you hit the ground. And then it's, well, nothing, because you're dead. So how do we teach kids so they don't jump off cliffs? Well, we teach them that obedience actually protects them. If you obey the law, you're protected by the law. So when I drive along, I've taught these lessons hundreds of times to my kids. I would give them an example. We'd be in the car and we'd be driving right at the speed limit. Speed control just, and a police car would come up behind us. Woo, woo. And I would say to the kids, now watch, this police car is going to go around us. And the police car went around us. And they went, how did you know he was going to go around us and he wasn't pulling you over? And I said, because I'm obeying the law. So I'm protected by the law. He's not after me. I check my car before I leave. There are no broken tail lights or anything. Let's see, I haven't robbed a bank. As far as he can tell, you're my kids and I'm not kidnapping you. You don't look like you're kidnapped. I'm not traveling faster than the speed limit. And so there's just no imaginable reason. There's no warrant out for my arrest. No reason to suspect that he's going to stop me. And sure enough, he goes around me. You keep the law, you're protected by the law, just like the law of gravity, just like the law of speeding. It's like the law keeps you in the flow that we were talking about. You don't keep the law, you turn sideways to the flow, and then you hit the rocks and bad things happen. So I had a son come to speak to me one day, and this is a kid who'd heard about the laws of obedience, and he was 15, and he said, Dad, I've been drinking alcohol, which clearly was not obedient to the laws that I taught him, and since he was underage, that breaks another law. I could have yelled at him and said, how many times have I told you not to? Did we not do these lessons? He knew all that. When we yell at our kids, we somehow assume that they're really stupid. So I just said, so why have you been drinking? He was a little surprised by that, but not too much, because we'd learned that anger doesn't help, which is why I've been telling you that. It doesn't help. So you won't use it. And he fumbled around for a little bit, and then he said, I guess I drink really because it makes me feel a little bit better. I said, yeah, that's why people drink. To feel less pain, which feels like happier, makes you feel better. It's really not better. You're not even at zero. It's not more happiness. It's just less pain. Your need for less pain is my fault. Watch your kids' faces the first time you say that. When a kid's doing something wrong and you go, My bad. Kid's irresponsible, and you go, my bad, I should have taught you this long before now. Every parent who's watching this is already behind the curve. Now, there might be an occasional couple who's watching this to prepare for parenting, which would be incredibly foresightful. But most of us get behind the curve, and we've already got disobedient children or children who are miserable or cutting or depressed or whatever. We're trying to catch up. Your children can't hear this too often. I'm the one that put you here. Drinking, I said to my son, is an escape from not feeling loved. That's on me. But it'll never work. That's why I've said to you before, no drinking. And I said it to him in exactly this tone. Not annoyed, not impatient, not lecturing, not stern. You think he doesn't already know he's doing something that isn't right? He knows the laws. So because I wasn't telling him I don't love you with my tone, he listened. I said, let's talk again in a week. That was the whole conversation. The first conversation lasted for 4 minutes, maybe. We'll talk again in a week. And he said, cool. I gave him a hug, and off he went. In a week we met, and I asked him how he was doing. He says, I'm not drinking as much. And I said, do you know why? He said, I really liked it that we talked last week. No kidding. Now, I didn't make the point because I didn't want to pound it in. What did he like about it? That he felt loved. That's what he liked. He felt loved while he was doing something wrong. That's almost the only time love counts. No kidding. If you love your children when they're cleaning up their rooms and waxing your car, so what? If you love your children when they're breaking the law, when they're being disobedient, when they're depressed, when they're cutting, when they're watching video games, when whatever, that's when it counts. That's accepting all of them. At 3 weeks, he wasn't drinking at all. He said, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't really make me feel better. In fact, I enjoy our talks, the one we were having right then, more than drinking. And as far as I know, he never drank again. And he almost certainly would have told me. Told me when he was 15. Why wouldn't he have told me since then? And he's living a life now that would be completely incompatible with drinking. If he were drinking, he could not be doing what he's doing. That's an example of teaching obedience and what the results are. Wow, now that's fun. That wasn't hard. There was no yelling. No expectations, no demands. Another example. This one gets even more practical and gets earlier in life so that you can prevent the drinking that will inevitably occur when they're 15 or whatever. One of my 2 daughters really liked to explore the edges of what she could get away with. You watched a bunch of kids exploring, and she'd be at the edge looking over her shoulder going, I wonder if anybody's going to see me when I do this. Most kids like to explore, but she really liked to do it. And she liked to explore the edges of things like, bedtime. So when she was 2, she was still sleeping in a crib. I think I've got the age about right. When you get to be this old, you forget what my kids will come up to me and they'll say, Dad, what was I like when I was 7? My adult kids. And I'll go, I barely remember that you were there when you were 7. It's too long ago. But when she was 2, she learned to crawl up over the rail of her crib. Then she would come into the next room where I was sitting, and she would peek her head around the corner and she'd go, hi. And it was really cute looking, I got to admit. And whoever else was in the room would just break into laughter. And I would just calmly say, notice there's no lecture. We've already taught them about obedience, and at 2, they know what that means. When I say do something, do it. We would act it out in family meetings. We'd do a little play, and I would say, is that an example of obedience or not? And I would turn to the 2-year-old and ask. We would act it out. They're old enough at 2. So I would just say, bed. Pay attention to my tone. No lecture, no yelling, no how many times have I told you. I would just say, bed. So she would go back to bed, reluctantly, because she really enjoyed the attention of being out of bed. And then, 5 minutes later, there she'd be at the corner again. Hi. She thought it was pretty fun the first time, so why not do it twice? The other people in the room, if there were any, would, of course, laugh and encourage that, which is, well, not helpful, but I didn't care. So the second time she did it, I said, come with me, in that tone. You're going to hear me say those words over and over again, in that tone. If you say, come with me, well, now you're just intimidating. You're not going to teach the kid anything except that you are louder, bigger, stronger, and can make them do whatever you want. Really, that's the lesson. Yeah, it doesn't lead to happiness. That's not loved, loving, and responsible, is it? Keep remembering, those are your 3 jobs. Come with me doesn't qualify for any of those. So she's going, well, that's an unusual response. Come with me. So she's dying to find out what it is. So she goes with me. We go out into the garage. I get a big 4x8 sheet of plywood. You cannot have too many sheets of plywood. And actually, before we did the plywood, we got a tape measure. We went in and we measured her crib, and then we went out to the plywood and got a table saw, and we made some cuts and drilled some holes and little notches. And anyway, we got done and took the sheet of plywood. By now, she's just fascinated because I had her help me drill and had her, you don't hand a 2-year-old a drill, power drill, but she had her help me push it down. And so she helped make this little creation. And then we went into her room and I said, so now get back up in your crib. She did. What I had made was a top for her crib. So with the right notches and so on, it just sat perfectly on the top of her crib. And with the little holes, I took a little small rope, and put it through the holes and then around the edge of the crib on the 4 corners, so that when I tied the rope in a way that she couldn't reach around and untie it, she was stuck in her crib. In fact, it looked exactly like a prison with prison bars and everything. A little tiny short prison for, a 2-year-old. And I said, well, good night. And I shut the door, because up to now she's thinking this is pretty fun. Shut the door, and I just stood there and waited, going, I could hardly keep myself from rolling on the floor laughing. In about 5 seconds, she caught on that she was in prison. And she screamed bloody murder. She wasn't afraid. No, she didn't grow up with a phobia of small places. She's not going to be emotionally scarred for life. Quit it. I'll tell you the rest of the story in a minute. She was so mad because she's an explorer. There's no exploring to be done in a prison cell, I guess, except count the slats in your prison, your crib. She screamed, and I let her scream for, 20 seconds. Listen to that again. 20 seconds, not 20 minutes. Not what some books do. Send them to timeout a minute for every age they are. I don't know, until you've made your point. So she made a bad choice. When we make bad choices, we pay the price of the bad choices. You speed, you get the ticket. You earned the ticket. You pretty much asked for the ticket because you knew what the law was. You jump off the cliff, you earn your death. Every law has a price to be paid if you don't keep it. So she was living in a prison cell for 20 seconds. And then I opened the door and I said, she was sobbing. I said, would you like to get out? Or would you like me to take the top off? She said, that by now they're just heaving. This is all in 20 seconds. She's just heaving with sobs. She said, yes. And I said, okay, so I'll take the top off. But if you get out of your crib again, I'll put the top back on. So, do we agree? Yes, she said. So I took the top off. She never did it again. Why? Because I just repeatedly whipped her or jabbed her with a cattle prod or, trained her like Pavlov's dogs? No, because even as a 2-year-old, she's pretty smart. I had taught her obedience before. Words did not work. So then we move on to the next stage, which we're going to get to talking about a whole lot more in a little bit. If words don't work, you use consequences. You make it so unpleasant for them to break the rules that they go, I don't like to pay the price for my being disobedient or whatever it is. So yeah, I'm going to keep the rules. It's easier, it's better, it's more fun. She never did it again. And the top was secured on there for 20 seconds before I opened the door. And then, it probably took me a few seconds to cross the room and untie the knots. And I don't know, a minute? 1 minute of no anger. And this little 2-year-old learned a principle of obedience that she carries with her for the rest of her life. Was that worth it? Yeah. I just gave you a practical example of loving and teaching that you will be able to apply to something your child is doing. Now, this is where it gets tricky, or maybe not so obvious. Your children need to be taught obedience no matter what their problem is. All of these little things that I'm teaching you to teach them, obedience and respect and to be loved and loving and responsible, all these things are things that will be necessary for you to teach your child, whether they have ADHD, whether they're cutting, whether they're using video games, whether they're addicted to porn, because if you teach them these things, obedience is one of those, isn't it? Loved, loving, it's responsible to be obedient. Previously, I told you that if you teach them the 3-legged stool of loved, loving, and responsible, I guarantee you, if they actually learn those things, you can't just mention them in passing and walk into the next room. No, consistently teach them to the point where they learn it. If they learn to feel loved, if they are loving, if they are responsible, I guarantee you they'll be happy. I did not say if they learn to feel loved, and if they learn to be loving, and if they learn to be responsible, they'll be happy unless, they're addicted to their phones. Unless they have ADHD. Unless they're cutting, unless they're whatever, because all of those kids in that slide, I'm not going to show you for the millionth time, of those 7 possibly most common problems that kids have, the big 7, I've called it before, you saw it included addictions and cutting and so on. All of those kids who have behavioral problems will get much better if they feel unconditionally loved. Just that alone. If they learn to be loving themselves to other people, even better. Sitting on an even 1-legged stool is easier than standing up all day. It's at least supports your weight. A little balancing, but you wouldn't want to paint on a 1-legged stool. 2 legs. Oh, even easier. Now you don't have to balance yourself in every direction, just 2. In fact, it turns into a rocking chair. You teach them all 3 things, and this stool becomes a rock. You can stand on this thing 50 feet high on scaffolding and paint over your head. That's the kind of child you want to have, is a child who can paint over their head at 50 feet standing on the stool that you help them create. Yeah, as opposed to a child who has endless problems and who you have to rescue from everything. They fall down on the flat ground when they hit a pebble. No, you're raising children who are going to be genuinely strong. Here's a 2-year-old who learned obedience with just simple instruction and a brief consequence. And you're going to learn to do this with your kids. No anger, no expectations, no demands, no disappointment. When I came in the room, I didn't go, No, I just said, you want me to take the top off? Turns out she did, and she learned from it. What was the second expectation that I listed that we have of our children? Gratitude. Oh, we love this one. We love to hear, oh, thank you, Daddy. It makes us feel important. Really, we expect it. We demand it, like we do with obedience. We brought these little elves into the world. We feed them, we transport them, we change their diapers, and then they're ungrateful? Are you kidding me? We can't have that. So, of course, we require gratitude. I mean, like, who wouldn't? And every parent around you will agree with you that they should be grateful for what they have. Every single parent. Well, we're close. They do need to learn gratitude, but see, we want them to be grateful to us. We want to have them feel obligated to us, so that's what we teach them. We teach them, we think we teach them gratitude, but we really don't. We force them to be grateful. That's called obligation. Watch a parent or another adult give a child, say, an ice cream cone, piece of candy, something, some little gift. If the child doesn't say the right thing within 2 seconds, I used to watch people do this and time it. On the average, 2 seconds. What do adults, especially parents, say next? They say, now, what do you say, to the nice man? Or what do you say to me? Or what do you say to your sister? We have heard that so many times, we don't even question whether it's the right thing to do. Everybody does it, like as in everybody. Now, what do you say? If you asked the parent, stop, you're at an amusement park. Parent gives the child an ice cream cone and then goes down. What do you say? Can you imagine? And you reach out and tap the parent on the shoulder and say, why did you just say that to your child? Well, for one thing, they would look at you like, what in the world are you doing? Is this a practical joke? They would say to teach them to be grateful. Wrong. In fact, completely wrong. It doesn't teach gratitude. It teaches obligation because we're forcing them. We're not really saying, it's not a question, though it ends in a question mark. We use this deceit all the time. What do you say? That's not a question. What do you say? We're telling them what to say. It doesn't stick, the lesson of gratitude, unless we're there to enforce it, even the lesson of obligation, for the rest of their lives. What are we going to, we're going to follow them around for the rest of their lives and tell them, now what do you say to people? So they say the right thing. Even then they wouldn't learn gratitude. So do our children need to learn gratitude? Well, yes, I'm not saying teaching them gratitude's the wrong thing. Daniel Defoe, the author, if you don't recognize him, he wrote Robinson Crusoe. How many movies have been done about that? He said, all of our discontents, all the things we're not happy with, all of our discontents about what we want appear to me to spring from the lack of thankfulness for what we do have. Ooh, that's deep and right. We're unhappy because we're not grateful for what we do have. Children who are ungrateful are always unhappy. Well, and then there are other things too. They're entitled and difficult and demanding and all that stuff. But so do we need to teach them gratitude? That would be a resounding yeah. G.K. Chesterton, who's a writer and philosopher from a number of years ago, said, thanks, gratitude, are the highest form of thought. Ooh, getting deeper by the minute. And gratitude is happiness doubled by wonder. Oh, it's just lovely. Children who are grateful just live in a continuous state of just wonder, like, cool, look at all I've got. And I've watched children who are taught gratitude. They just giggle at the miracle of their lives. A really old Roman philosopher, like 100 years BC, whose name said in Latin, I was sure I would just screw it up. He said this, a thankful heart is not only the greatest virtue, but the parent of all other virtues. You'll never feel, for example, let's just go through some. You'll never feel loved until you feel grateful for it. You'll never be obedient until you're grateful for the benefits of the law and how it protects you. You'll never participate in a partnership with somebody for whom you are not profoundly grateful. Without gratitude, you're kind of doomed. I would add all these sayings up and turn them into a couple of sentences. If you're consistently grateful, you will be happy. It's a guarantee, no kidding. And it's not possible to be grateful and unhappy at the same time. Really. If there's ever a time, and there will be in your life, when you're feeling unhappy, look for how you're being ungrateful. Or, take your pick, look for what you could be grateful for. You can't do both things, grateful and unhappy. Not possible. There's no virtue that you will teach your child greater than love, responsibility, and gratitude. Pretty good votes for gratitude. You'll be happier if you're grateful, and you'll contribute to the happiness of the people around you, and your children will be happier. So yeah, we need to teach our children gratitude. So how can we teach real gratitude, the kind that lasts, the kind that produces happiness? No great surprise again, with love. I was with one of my grandchildren working outside in the yard, and he was like, I don't know, 14 at the time. And he said that working outside with Grandpa was his favorite thing in the world to do. Of all things, not going to Disney World, not ice cream, working outside with Grandpa. Imagine. Why? Because when we worked together, I spent every minute focused on him, talking to him. More important, listening to him. We worked all day one day. It was hard work, the kind of work that many people have never done. Man, we split wood, we moved dirt, we spread grass seed, we spread dirt on top of the grass seed. It was real toil, a word we don't hear very often anymore. Now, pay attention. This kid was 14, and I'm about to teach him a lesson in gratitude. You could use almost the same words doing a task with any child down to about 2 to 3, almost the same words. So this is very practical teaching of you so that you can then love and teach your child. As we walked back into the house, I put my arm around him. So I touched him, simply gave him a physical sign that I loved him, which he already knew. It just emphasized the point. And I said, that was a lot of work you did today. listen to my tone. I'm not all giggly and praising him and, oh, wow, you are so great. No, that was a lot of work you did today. It helped me a lot, and I appreciate the help. What did I just do? Just calmly as can be, taught him that I was grateful for him, the touching, and additionally, separately, grateful for the work that he did. I taught him by example what gratitude looked like. I didn't say, okay, time for a gratitude lesson, at which point most kids' ears just go. He looked up at me and he said, priceless. You didn't do so bad yourself, Grandpa. He was giving me feedback too. Apparently, I had worked pretty well myself. He had learned gratitude, so he was happier. He then expressed gratitude to me more with his tone than with his words. In the evening, I brought up that little exchange. Hours later, I asked him how it felt for him when I told him that I was grateful, and he said, pretty good. And he was obviously proud of that. I told him that I enjoyed being grateful for him all day long. I enjoyed it. I liked it, being grateful for him. It made the whole day better. And then I said, and that is why it's better to be grateful, because it's just happier. That's why. Not because they owe you gratitude. An entire year later, he brought up his memory of that lesson a year before. He said, do you remember when we worked together and we planted seed? And it took me a second. As soon as you say planting seed, I know what it was, because you can only plant seed for a couple of weeks in the spring and a couple in the fall, at least where I live. He brought that up and said how much he learned from it. This is loving and teaching. We've already done at least 30 examples up to this point. We're going to do at least 30 more. Any teaching with impatience or irritation or intimidation or by force will not last, and usually even in the short term will not work. A third expectation on that list, respect. We tend to demand it because we feel we've earned it. Well, maybe, because we've done a lot for our kids. Everybody deserves respect, though. It's not because of what you've done. We deserve respect because we're human beings, because we breathe. Our children deserve respect. But if we demand it, we only get obligation. In fact, if we force them to respect us, they will tend to respect us less by a lot. I can tell you what happens to them as adults when they speak about their parents who demanded respect, and the expression on their faces is not one of gratitude or happiness. I can tell you the long-term results. I can tell you the short-term results. Forcing a kid to be respectful is just stupid. It doesn't work. But is respect a good principle to teach? Well, duh. When we respect the opinions and rights of others, we're happier. So are they. When we disrespect others, they tend to avoid us, making healthy relationships impossible. When we disrespect our teachers, we get in trouble. When we disrespect our bosses, we get fired. Try disrespecting, just with a single phrase, possibly single word, disrespecting a policeman who's pulled you over for a simple traffic violation, and find out that you don't like sleeping on a thin cushion lying on a piece of steel that's supported by more steel extending from the wall where there's yet more steel. So yeah, it's a good thing to learn respect. But how do you teach it? Demand it? Nah, it doesn't work. Love and teach. Again, how? What does that look like? Let's get practical as we have been. I'll give you one example, mainly because we don't have time for me to give you practical examples times 10 for every single principle. There just isn't time. But in your subsequent resources on the website, the resources are going to multiply. We're going to keep adding to them all the time. Many, many years ago, our family moved to a fairly small town in Georgia, the one I'm sitting in right now, actually, in the deep South, where respect was expected by adults, especially people in authority like teachers. And they got it. They demanded it. Everybody called teachers sir or ma'am. Expected. You could get sent to the principal's office if you simply answered a question and didn't finish it with sir or ma'am. Now, my kids had learned from me long before then, and even when we moved here, that it was up to them whether they said sir or ma'am. It's not a requirement. It's not a law. If you start forcing your kids to do things that don't have an obvious law, they start to resent it. So I said, you don't have to do that wherever you go. So one day, one of them came home having spent time in after-school detention because a teacher had been mortally offended that he had not said, yes, ma'am. And he said, Dad, do I have to say sir or ma'am at school? So this is a question about respect, yeah? You've never made us do that before. And I said, no, you don't have to. He looked relieved. In fact, he looked a little smug, like he just couldn't wait to go back and tell his teacher that his dad said he didn't have to do that, and his dad was bigger than the teacher. You could just see that look in his face. But I continued. But if you don't say sir or ma'am, especially in a place where it's such a strong custom, almost a law, then you had to be prepared to pay the price. If you refuse the local custom, teachers will make you pay the price. They'll be less respectful of you. You will get in more trouble because they'll be looking for trouble from you. And if there's any disturbance, they're going to look over in your direction and go, well, there's the disrespectful kid. It must have been him. And even if they don't realize it, when it comes time to grading you, because teachers have a lot of subjective opportunities to grade, like essay questions. How well was this written? Well, a lot of that depends on what they think of you. You'll tend to be negatively evaluated. You will get worse grades, and you really won't like the long-term consequences of that. So, up to you. You willing to pay the price? My son decided, that respect, even if it was somewhat forced, had some advantages, and so he adopted the use of sir and ma'am. Most virtues, all virtues have advantages, and we need to teach these to our kids. Now, in this particular case, it was kind of an obligated respect. Still respect, though, and he decided, I see the point. Yeah, it's worth my doing. There were two more expectations that I listed on that slide that we looked at a bit ago, but we don't need to go over those right now. Don't have time. The point is that there's so much we need to teach our children, and if we do it with love, we can succeed much, much more effectively than if we use any other approach. To summarize, in this chapter, we discussed that we must never, ever express anger at our children. It destroys them. Nobody ever makes us angry, including our children. We talked about how we can respond to our own anger, how we can express it in a rewarding way, and eliminate it by changing our perspectives and by telling the truth about it to other adults, which creates opportunities to create the love that does eliminate anger. And without anger, we can teach our children everything they need to know about finding happiness. We've spoken about how unloving we are when we're angry and how telling the truth about ourselves can really change that. In the next chapter, we'll talk a lot more about how to tell the truth about our anger and our other mistakes to our children and others. Most of us have done this, telling the truth about our mistakes and anger, little to never in our lives. This will be an interesting and difficult experience for you. I look forward to it.